The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club with Thom Hartmann University, we're reading from what is apparently Donald Trump's second favorite book. His number one, according to his first wife, as I recall, was the collected speeches of Adolf Hitler, which was on his bed on his bedstand next to his bed for years. But when he was asked by reporters his favorite book, he said P.T. Barnum's The Art of Money Getting, or Golden Rules for Making Money. So I thought, hey, let's check this out. This is from the introduction. Those who really desire to attain an independence, but have only to set their minds upon it and adopt the proper means, as they do in regard to any other object which they wish to accomplish, and the thing is easily done. But however easy it may be found to make money, I have no doubt many of my hearers will agree it is the most difficult thing in the world to keep it. The road to wealth is, as Dr. Ben Franklin truly says, as plain as the road to the mill. It consists simply in expending less than we earn. That seems to be a very simple problem. Mr. Micawber, one of those happy creations of the genial Dickens, puts the case in a strong light when he says that to have an income of £20 per annum and spend £20 and 6 pence is to be the most miserable of men, whereas to have an income of only £20 and spend but £19 and 6 pence is to be the happiest of mortals. Many of my readers may say, we understand this. This is economy, and we know economy is wealth. We know we can't eat our cake and keep it also. Yet I beg to say that perhaps more cases of failure arise from mistakes on this point than almost any other. The fact is, many people think they understand economy when they really do not. True economy is misapprehended, and people go through life without properly comprehending what that principle is. One person says, I have an income of so much, and here's my neighbor who has the same, yet every year he gets something ahead and I fall short. Why is it? I know all about economy. Well, he thinks he does, but he does not. There are many who think that economy consists in saving cheese parings and candle ends. Keep in mind, this was written in the late 1900s. In cutting off 2 pence from the laundress's bill and doing all sorts of little mean, dirty things. Economy is not meanness. The misfortune is also that this class of persons let their economy apply in only one direction. They fancy that they are so wonderfully economical in saving a halfpenny where they ought to spend 2 pence that they think they can afford to squander in other directions. A few years ago, before kerosene oil was discovered or thought of, one might stop overnight at almost any farmer's house in the agricultural districts to get a very good supper. But after supper, he might attempt to read in the sitting room and would find it impossible with insufficient light from just one candle. The hostess, seeing his dilemma, would say, it is rather difficult to read here in the evenings. The proverb said, you must have a ship at sea in order to be able to burn 2 candles at once. We never have an extra candle except on extra occasions. Those extra occasions occur perhaps twice a year. In this way, the good woman saves $5, $6, or $10 in that time, but the information which might be derived from having an extra candle would, of course, far outweigh a ton of candles. But the trouble does not end there. Feeling that she is so economical in tallow candles, she thinks she can afford to go frequently to the village and spend $20 or $30 for ribbons and furloughs, many of which are not necessary. This false economy may
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news.
Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them
in standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day,
every
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, and it being Wednesday in the first hour of our program, it's midweek, middays, with Congressman Mark Pocan on the line with us, representing the 2nd District of Wisconsin, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman Pocan, welcome back to the program. Yes, no, maybe? It's on, I put him on, hang on just a second. Let me move him over to 2. Okay, we've got him on hybrid number 2. Congressman Pocan, can you hear me?
I can, thanks. Glad to be here.
Great, thanks so much for being with us. We've got a new studio, and we're using an older version of our call screen software for the moment as we're trying to figure out a bug in our new one. And anyway, it's all good.
No problem at all.
So, in your opinion, a lot has happened since we talked last week, and I'm curious what you think are the most consequential things that have happened in the past week and what you're looking at coming up. What is on your radar screen?
Well, this is one of the weeks that we're back in district. So I've been doing town halls again in my district. I'm sorry?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, and I did one actually yesterday in Paul Ryan's district, and whenever we do these town halls, we wind up getting a couple subjects that keep coming up. One being healthcare. People are still very, very concerned about what's going to ultimately happen. And then secondly, this new tax cut for the wealthy package that they're putting out there. Paul Ryan is going around Wisconsin telling everyone that they're doing this for the middle class, and as long as he means by the middle class the Trump family, the Trump cabinet, the members of Mar-a-Lago, and the top 1%, he's maybe accurate. But we're basically just trying to make sure people understand, this is probably the biggest lie that I've heard since I've been in Congress on how they're presenting this tax plan. And those are the two issues, along with things like North Korea and some other issues, but those are the big two that keep coming up.
Yeah. And do you expect that, I mean, how do you think this is going to play out legislatively?
Well, I think the real question on this healthcare thing is, once again, Donald Trump is, to no one's surprise, being inconsistent. So, at one point last week, he took away the subsidy to insurance companies to make sure that, people can have access to insurance through the Affordable Care Act. Then when there's a deal between Patty Murray and Lamar Alexander, he at first said he supported it. Probably didn't have a clue what he was actually saying. Then he said he didn't support it. Now I think this morning he said he didn't support it. We'll see if he goes back and forth a few more times. But, at least someone is trying to do something to address the 20 million people that otherwise could lose their health insurance if the Republicans get their way. So I think that's one thing we're watching especially closely. And then when it comes to tax policy, already Paul Ryan is starting to change some of the language they've been using as far as maybe it won't take away the deduction for children, I guess is most recently what he's saying while he's here in Wisconsin. And so, again, this is a terrible plan that's going to benefit only the wealthiest in this country, and he's trying to figure out how to reel back the terribleness of what their idea is.
When you're doing your town halls in Paul Ryan's district, do people get it that the Republican Party is basically only representing the interests of the wealthy and powerful? I mean, is there a, in your sense of it, is there a broad understanding of that?
I'll tell you, people I think are very upset with Paul Ryan in his district. I mean, he's completely ignored them, hasn't done a public town hall for over 700 days. It's, becoming a couple years since he's done one. And, he's the one who's putting out these terrible provisions to drop 20 million people from their health insurance. He's the one out advocating for a tax plan that's not going to benefit very many people in the 1st Congressional District of Wisconsin. And I think they're starting to really connect with that. I think a big part of my job this week is explaining Paul Ryan keeps saying this is for the middle class. Donald Trump kept saying he's not going to benefit from this. And they're just both lying. There's no other way to put it about what their plan does. So I think we're just trying to make sure people fully understand how much their member of Congress lies to them, and then they can make a decision next November how to deal with it.
Yeah. Back on March 29th, 1952, Harry Truman spoke to this issue of the Republican Party and taxes. May I play a clip for you? I'd like to get your thoughts on Harry Truman's era Republicans versus today's. Here is former President of the United States, Harry Truman.
Now I want to say something very important to you about this issue of morality in government. It is just as immoral to use the lawmaking power of the government to enrich the few at the expense of the many as it is to steal money from the public treasury. That is stealing money from the public treasury. Legislation that favored the greed of monopoly and the trickery of Wall Street was a form of corruption that did the country 4 times as much harm as Teapot Dome ever did. Private, selfish interests are always trying to corrupt the government in this way. Powerful financial groups are always trying to get favors for themselves. Now, the Democratic administration has been fighting against these efforts to corrupt the powers of government. We haven't always won, but we have never surrendered, and we never will.
And then it goes on to talk about the Republican
For all these
Party.
years, we've been fighting to use our natural resources for the benefit.
He goes on from there. He wraps it up with this kind of epic rant about the Republican Party, but the clip was getting too long there. So anyhow, your thoughts on basically his rant at the end. He says the Republican Party stands for vested interest in the wealthy and always has and always will.
Yeah, I wish there was a shred of that kind of morality in the current Republican Party when it comes to, I think the tax plan is still the best example, Tom. I mean, they are outright presenting complete falsehoods about what this plan is about, and now their most recent one they're trying to spin is that this will create all this growth, and that's why it's going to be better instead of adding to the deficit or to the debt. And, this is just an outrageous lie to say when the University of Chicago says that from what they can tell, this plan for a middle-class family making $50,000 with 3 children will wind up paying $1,400 more in taxes. so you can get rid of the estate tax that affects about 2 out of every 1,000 people in a given year. This is clearly redistribution of wealth from the bottom up, and Paul Ryan this week was claiming that we're using class warfare against them. And I would argue it's Paul Ryan who's conducting the warfare against all the rest of us.
Yeah, what's his name? The billionaire investor made that comment. Yes, there's class warfare. My class is declared war, and we are winning. I don't recall, that wasn't George Soros, that was Warren Buffett who said that. And it appears to be the case. It absolutely appears to be the case. Congressman, you still with us?
Yes, I'm sorry. I think maybe at the half-hour break, I'm going to switch phones because I'm getting an echo on this one. So I think it might be my home phone.
Oh, okay. All righty. Well, we have just a minute till the break, and then we can pick up phone calls here. Do you think that there is, Steve Mnuchin came out this morning and said if Congress doesn't pass tax reform, you're going to see the Dow crash. I think we're going to see the Dow crash anyway, for a whole bunch of other reasons unrelated to that. But do you think that and his definition of tax reform, of course, is tax cuts for the rich. Do you think it's going to pass?
I think they're going to have a hard time with the current form of it. I mean, in the end of the day, I wouldn't be surprised that we wind up just doing some out-and-out tax cuts that'll still largely affect the wealthy the most. Even on their current proposal, it's been estimated that in 10 years, 80% of it is going to go to the top 1% and 2%. We already know that that's the current plan. And I think, because of some of the exemptions, they're having problems with some of the Senate Republicans. They may have to just come through with a smaller tax cut. But again, it's still not going to be for the middle class. And we just have to be vigilant in fighting. I'm with the organization that says, not one penny for the wealthy. And there's an organization with a lot of groups part of that. I think we need to follow their efforts.
Yeah, amen. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. His website, Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. We'll be back with your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan right after this. Welcome back. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Hey, gentlemen. I basically wanted to call in because I had watched not necessarily a question, but it deals with the tax cuts and the budget coming up. I had watched a CNN deal with Nancy Pelosi on the Axe file or whatever, a David Rod. And I really liked that, and they announced that Bernie was going to have a debate with Ted Cruz tonight on CNN about tax cuts or the budget. So pretty much, God bless you, Mark, for going into Congressman Ryan's district and taking care of the voters, and thanks for being a courageous and a good representative of the people. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you, Randy. Congressman, your thoughts on Randy's comments?
So, Tom, I couldn't hear anything Randy said, and I don't think it's my phone. I think it might be the software.
Okay. I'm going to, Sean, I'm going to move Congressman Pocan to hybrid 1. And so, Congressman, you still there?
I am still here.
Okay. I've reconfigured you on our software. Randy, Randy actually was more making a comment than asking a question. So let's see if we can get another person in here with a question and see how that works. Scott in Canaan, Maine. Scott, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, Congressman Pocan. Can you hear Scott?
Yeah. When he was on that other line, my television was beeping and staticking and doing all kinds of crazy
Yeah, I think
stuff.
that was the caller. But, Congressman, can you hear Scott?
Yes, I can hear him perfectly.
Great. Okay, Scott, ask
How have you been, Congressman? It's been a long time. I had just a simple question, basically. With these companies that are overseas and they're putting their money in offshore accounts, That's we know who they are, GE and Apple, and there's a few of them. Why hasn't anybody in the Senate or the Congress gone after them people for tax evasion? If I tried to hide $500 in an offshore account, the IRS would be all over me before I woke up in the morning. Why is there one rule for them and one for us? I mean, why aren't you guys going after those people to get them for tax evasion?
Scott, there are
that's what it is. It's tax evasion instead of trying to give them.
I got it, Scott.
Thank you.
There are plenty of efforts by Democrats to go after that. There are bills that we've introduced, and I'm co-sponsors of, to go after that and make people collect that tax up front before they can put it overseas. The problem is the majority, the Republicans in the House and the Senate, haven't been willing to address that as an issue, and yet I agree with you. All the rest of us have it taken out of our paychecks, or we have to pay it in quarterly, and we have to pay taxes, and somehow the bigger corporations are allowed to either via loophole like an inversion or via they're arguing that the profits overseas shouldn't be taxed, and they've found other ways to try to hide it and land it over there. They just can't really bring it back, but they know that Congress will and has in the past done these holidays where they get, pay pennies on the dollar, and they can bring it back legally, and they're big enough that they can do that. So it's a huge issue. There are multiple bills. I think Lloyd Doggett has been probably the most articulate person, the Democrat on the Ways and Means Committee, talking about these sort of things. It's just we're not having the majority party at all participating in what I agree certainly seems like tax evasion to anyone else in the world.
Amen. We'll be right back with more of your calls with Congressman Pocan right after this. Last time you looked.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And here, Russell in Chicago. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Awesome. I remember standing in it.
Russell?
That's an awesome fight.
Okay, Russell is apparently not listening to his phone. McWayne in Chino Valley, Arizona. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, Congressman. I wonder if you might be able to comment on our Predator foe Commander-in-Chief's decision to relax the rules of engagement, that what once was collateral is now tactical damage, the indiscriminate killing of men, women, and children, turning everything to rubble so that we can declare victory. Just taking off the table any diplomatic morality and for exclusive military barbarity, and at the same time, aren't we creating a new generation of what we call terrorists who are strictly freedom fighters trying to free themselves from the chains of American and European imperialism?
There's a mouthful. Congressman, your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, McQueen, I think the second part you said, I think, is something that's especially significant in what we do around the world has other actions. And, just look at the issue of peace in Palestine and Israel. If we were actually able to help move them to a solution, you would take away one of the largest arguments that ISIS uses when they recruit people. because every time they can point to what they say is unbalanced treatment by the United States to other countries, they're able to continue to somehow prove that, it's us against them. And our actions, compiled by, I think, a lot of the actions that President Trump has done by, whether it be the name-calling of other leaders or bad ideas that he's done when it comes to international relations, just makes it even worse. So that, in the end, I think is a very valid argument that it probably does embolden them in recruitment, which doesn't help our efforts at all. That's why we really think we need to focus more on diplomacy, working with people in regions who actually know the region, and not trying to be the world's policeman. If you really want to have a stable world, that is not the best position for the United States.
Dave in Hot Springs Village, Arkansas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
How do you do, Congressman? Dave Turner. I'm from Hot Springs Village now, formerly of Delavan, Wisconsin. I was worried, I'm still worried about the number of progressive caucus people in Congress. The last time I asked you this question, you mentioned that it was fashionable to be progressive. I think there's got to be a better answer than that. And Tom, that remark about my class is winning, that was not George Soros, that was Warren Buffett.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Thank you, Dave. Congressman?
Yeah, Dave, so I think, I'm not sure if I fully understood your question, but I think what I've said in the past is we have more people looking to join because right now, where the heart of, I think, the Democratic Party and the movement is on progressive politics. So, when I say more people want to join, we've had people previously that haven't been in the caucus but have voted progressively or have voted for our progressive caucus budget, which is a very progressive statement of principles, and haven't been members. So it's not that we're weakening standards to let anyone in who wants to throw the word progressive on their name. But, if people are there supporting our progressive caucus budget and supporting our major efforts that we've had around things like Medicare for All or raising the minimum wage to $15, certainly we're finding that there's more interest in being a progressive these days than maybe there have been in the last several years.
That seems like a good thing. Bob in South Jersey, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. We have about a minute and a half.
Hello?
Hey, Bob, quick question for the Congressman. Bob?
Hello? Ed?
Yeah. Bob, you're on the air.
Hi. I was calling to complain about what Congressman Pocan has been saying the position of the Democratic Party is on respect of all these issues. The Republicans have been very effective because they have a few issues and they drive the message home hard. If we fought this tax cut on the basis that the overruns will kill Social Security and Medicare, that's the sort of message that you can get through to everybody. But it's so diverse, people never get our message.
Yeah, Bob, I actually, on this one, I'm disagreeing with you. I think, the bottom line is their message is they're doing a tax cut for the middle class. Donald Trump said he's not going to benefit, but he's doing it because the middle class needs it. And the reality is the middle class is going to pay for all the tax cuts that they're putting out there for the wealthy. So I think that is a pretty clear, concrete message. You can go into all the other ways they'll also be affected, but the bottom line is they're going to tax people in the middle class more by doubling that one deduction and taking away other deductions that middle class people use and raising the lowest rate on the poorest in this country. You're shifting money and making people pay for tax cuts for the wealthy. And I think that's pretty clean, pretty clear, and I think as long as we get that message out there, people will really understand who's on their side.
We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan and Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It is midweek, it is midday, and Congressman Mark Pocan is taking your calls. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan, MarkPocan, and we'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right now.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with Middays with Mark Pocan right after this.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Naomi Klein's brilliant new book, This Changes Everything. This from the introduction. A voice came over the intercom. Would the passengers of Flight 3935, scheduled to depart Washington, D.C. for Charleston, South Carolina, kindly collect their carry-on luggage and get off the plane? They went down the stairs and gathered on the hot tarmac. Then they saw something unusual. The wheels of the U.S. Airways jet had sunk into the black pavement as if it was wet cement. The wheels were lodged so deep, in fact, that the truck that came to tow the plane away couldn't pry out loose. The airline had hoped that without the added weight of the plane's 35 passengers, the aircraft would be light enough to pull. It wasn't. Someone posted a picture. Why is my flight canceled? Because D.C. is so damn hot that our planes sank 4 inches into the pavement. Eventually, a larger, more powerful vehicle was brought in to tow the plane, and this time it worked. The plane finally took off 3 hours behind schedule. The spokesperson for the airline blamed the incident on very unusual temperatures. The temperatures in the summer of 2012 were indeed unusually hot, as they were the year before and the year before. And it's no mystery why this has been happening. The profligate burning of fossil fuels, the very thing that U.S. Airways was bound and determined to do, despite the inconvenience presented by a melting tarmac. This irony, the fact that the burning of fossil fuels is so radically changing our climate that it's getting in the way of our capacity to burn fossil fuels, did not stop the passengers of Flight 3935 from re-embarking and continuing their journeys. Nor was climate change mentioned in any of the major news coverage of the incident. I'm in no position to judge these passengers. All of us who live high consumer lifestyles, wherever we may happen to reside, are metaphorically passengers on Flight 3935. Faced with a crisis that threatens our survival as a species, our entire culture is continuing to do the very thing that caused the crisis, only with an extra dose of elbow grease behind it. Like the airline bringing in a truck with a more powerful engine to tow that plane, the global economy is upping the ante from conventional sources of fossil fuels to even dirtier and more dangerous versions. Bitumen from the Alberta tar sands, oil from deepwater drilling, gas from hydraulic fracking, coal from detonated mountains, and so on. Meanwhile, each supercharged natural disaster produces new irony-laden snapshots of a climate increasingly inhospitable to the very industries most responsible for its warming, like the 2013 historic floods in Calgary that forced the head offices of the oil companies mining the Alberta tar sands to go dark and send their employees home, while a train carrying flammable petroleum products teetered on the edge of a disintegrating rail bridge. Or the drought that hit the Mississippi River 1 year earlier, pushing water levels so low that barges loaded with coal and oil were unable to move for days while they waited for the Army Corps of Engineers to dredge a channel. They had to appropriate funds allocated to rebuild from the previous year's historic flooding along the same waterway. Or the coal-fired power plants in other parts of the country that were temporarily shut down because the waterways that they draw into cooler machinery were either too hot or too dry, or in some cases both. Living with this kind of cognitive dissonance is simply part of being alive in this jarring moment of history, when a crisis that we have been studiously ignoring is hitting us in the face. And yet we're doubling down on the stuff that caused the crisis in the first place. I denied climate change for longer than I care to admit. I knew it was happening, sure, and not like Donald Trump and the Tea Partiers going on about how the continued existence of winter proves it's all a hoax. But I stayed pretty hazy on the details and only skimmed most of the news stories, especially the really scary ones. I told myself the science was too complicated and that the environmentalists, they're dealing with it. And I continue to behave as if there was nothing wrong with the shiny card in my wallet attesting to my elite frequent flyer status. A great many of us engage in this kind of climate change denial. We look for a split second and then we look away. Or we look but then turn it into a joke. More signs of the apocalypse, which is another way of looking away. Or we look but tell ourselves comforting stories about how humans are clever and will come up with a technological miracle that will safely suck the carbon out of the skies or magically turn down the heat of the sun, which I was to discover while researching this book is yet another way of looking away. Or we try to look, we look but try to be hyper-rational about it. Dollar for dollar, it's more efficient to focus on economic development than climate change, since wealth is the best protection from climate extremes, weather extremes. As if having a few more dollars will make much difference when your city is underwater, which is a way of looking away if you happen to be a policy wonk. Or we look but tell ourselves we're too busy to care about something so distant and abstract, even though we saw the water in the subways in New York City and the people on the rooftops in New Orleans and know that no one is safe, the most vulnerable least of all. And though perfectly understandable, this too is a way of looking away. Or we look, but tell ourselves that all we can do is focus on ourselves. Meditate and shop at farmers markets and stop driving. But forget trying to actually change the systems that are making the crisis inevitable, because that's too much bad energy and it'll never work. And at first it may appear as if we are looking, because many of these lifestyle changes are indeed part of the solution. But we still have one eye tightly shut. Or maybe we really look, but then inevitably we seem to forget. Remember and then forget again. Climate change is like that. It's hard to keep in your head for very long. Engage in this odd form of on-again, off-again ecological amnesia for perfectly rational reasons. We deny it because we fear that letting in the full reality of this crisis will change everything. And we are right. And the book is This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's our Middays with Mark segment here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman, we tried another phone, I guess. How does everything sound now?
Actually, I think it was just that first, when you switched me to the second line, I got rid of the echo and I could hear everybody fine, so we're in great shape.
So it sounds good right now?
Yep, it's perfect.
Okay, let me know if there's any problem, okay? We can just talk about it on the air. It's no problem. Okay, so Scott in Wisconsin, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Congressman Pocan, I have a question for you. Up here in western Wisconsin, we have a lot of county boards and city councils that are, I would say, leaning Democratic, but we are under, we always challenge every elections by the other party, even though these are nonpartisan. And the one issue I'd like to ask is, you're doing a lot of town halls down there. What's the chances you can get Ron Kind and yourself to come up to this western part of Wisconsin, like the entry into Minnesota? Because we have Duffy representing us up here, and so much misinformation. Plus, these local offices are being attacked so much by the state of Wisconsin and getting rid of a lot of our local controls, especially along the rivers. Is there any chance that someday when you have a break that you can get Ron Kind and come on up here and rally the troops a little bit? Because I know this election's coming up this spring is going to be huge for local offices. We need the Democratic Party of Wisconsin to also get very engaged, because once you lose local control, you have nothing. And that's just kind of how it is.
Congressman, your thoughts?
Yeah, I hear you, Scott. First of all, what I'm doing is part of an effort the Progressive Caucus has kind of been coordinating, which is called Adopt a District, where we're picking a district and we go into it, and then hopefully we'll keep that relationship. So for me, it's my 5th town hall in Paul Ryan's district, and I'm going to keep going back to Paul Ryan's district. So, it's hard to take on additional districts, and you'd have to reach out to Ron himself if he might be able to do that. But, I certainly appreciate, Sean Duffy has been one of the closest people in Congress to Donald Trump, and it'd be great to get an upgrade. Dave Obey used to represent that area, and, he was a stellar member of Congress. And I agree with you, the Democratic Party does have organizers right now across the state, including in western Wisconsin, and that's something new, and I think that's exactly what we're trying to do, is build from local government to state government to federal government. So those things are underplay, but I just say if you can reach out to Ron or anyone from Minnesota that's just across the Mississippi there to come over, if they haven't adopted a district, maybe they'll come by and provide you that assistance.
Roy in Newport, Florida. Roy, you're on the air with Congressman.
Good afternoon. Congressman, I was under the impression that Trump eliminated the premium tax credits on the ACA, Obamacare, sometimes called subsidies. Yet I received a Florida Blue, which is my health care provider down here in Florida, email today assuring me that the premium tax credits, quote, sometimes called subsidies that help with your premiums, are not, the word not, in emphasis, going away. Could you shed any light on that? I'm really confused over this.
Yeah, so I don't know, because I haven't seen the email. I can't comment directly to that, but let me comment in this way. I know that the president on Friday said he's going to end those subsidies, and I believe there's already a legal challenge in place to try to stop that from happening. Interestingly, in Wisconsin, we got a call from the insurance commissioner the day before, and our rates in the Affordable Care Act went up 36% in Wisconsin. But the reason they went up 36% is the Republican Governor Scott Walker directed insurance companies to assume they were going to lose the subsidy when they set the rates. So somehow, go figure, the next day the president makes that announcement, but for months earlier, they were instructed by the state of Wisconsin to assume that's not there. So I guess what I'm getting at is in many ways it's clear as mud, right, what's happening. The president may be challenged. There may be some action with what the Senate did through a bipartisan compromise, but the president's intention, as stated this weekend by Steve Bannon at a so-called values voter summit, was that he did that to try to destroy the Affordable Care Act, and that's still what their ultimate goal is to figure out how to destroy it so they can get that tax money back to the wealthy and to insurance companies and big pharma.
Well, and in fact, the insurance commissioner for Pennsylvania, I believe it was, has said that the 30-some-odd% increase that was just announced for Pennsylvania is specifically the result of Trump killing off these cost-sharing payments. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We'll see where this one goes. Let's see. David in Galesville, Maryland. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes. Hi, Congressman. I'm calling because earlier this morning we had a caller who called in and said that he felt the Democrats were losing their talk, and they were talking. You specifically went about tax cuts, and then you went into a definition of why you felt he was wrong, and you explained what Trump was doing. Now, I'm an electrical engineer. 30 sentence or 30 words into your sentence, I was lost. What Trump would have came out and said, what you should have came out and says Trump lied and tax cuts are going to go to the rich or something like that. And then that's it. You went into an explanation why you were right. You lost at least me on the phone. And
well, David, if you would have heard the beginning of the program, the first thing I said is the biggest lie since I've been in Congress is what they're saying about tax cuts and that the middle class are going to pay and they're not going to be the beneficiaries. So I did pretty much say that. I think what the caller said is he started getting into one, not necessarily obscure, but one provision on Social Security. So I tried to explain to him, while some people may appreciate that, I think broader, what they're going to understand is that the middle class, because of losing other exemptions, are going to wind up paying more. So I was going into detail because he gave a detail, but I don't disagree with you at all, David. Bottom line is they're lying to us about what this is, and the middle class will pay more for tax cuts for the wealthy. That is the bottom line, and then I'm giving the actual specifics to show why that happened. So I don't think we're in disagreement, David, at all. But I do think that gentleman was going specifically to a provision within Social Security, and that's why I was trying to explain there's lots of provisions, but perhaps the easiest way of explaining is we're being told a middle-class family making $50,000 with 3 kids will pay $1,400 more. That's, I think, fairly clear and understandable for most people to understand.
And here's 10 seconds of Harry Truman essentially agreeing with you.
These Republican gentlemen can't have it both ways. They can't be for morality on Tuesday and Thursday, and then be for special privileges for their clients on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
There you go. Okay, let's see here. Lowell in Salem, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. I am a strong progressive, and I see that as a party platform, we have a fight for 15, or we finally, worked to get a fight for 15 on the platform. But I see that Tom Perez, the DNC chair, has appointed Dan Halpern to be the finance chair for the DNC, and he fought against raising the minimum wage. And I'm wondering how we can, as Democrats, believe that we're actually fighting for 15. With
I think, well, this is one, again, we don't want to get in the weeds. If a particular individual is working for the DNC who, I don't even know who this individual is, may or may not support a fight for 15, doesn't mean as much as almost every Democratic representative and senator sponsoring a bill to raise the minimum wage to $15 and the party platform explicitly saying it. So I think sometimes we have a tendency to try to find that one thing that is off and wrong, and instead we need to focus on the fact that right now I have never seen the unanimity among Democrats in support to make sure that we're getting to a $15 minimum wage, both in sponsorship of bills and in the party platform, and I think that's what's really significant.
Rob, in Chico, California, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. I got about a minute and a half to the break here, Rob.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. Tom, I know you do, I don't know if the congressperson does, often refer to wealthy and rich kind of as a dog whistle. So I have two questions. Is being wealthy and rich bad and immoral? And B, congressperson, how do you determine what is a rich person? What is a wealthy person? Do you have exact stats and information? Is it different in San Francisco than Wichita?
Okay, Congressman?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about it, we're referring to at least at the tax levels where people are going to have their taxes dropped from the wealthiest in this country and others. I don't think most people, I haven't had a single person raise the issue you just did about what are we defining as wealth or rich people. I think when they pretty much understand, with examples given that someone making $50,000 with 3 children is going to pay an increase, they understand that probably represents them and the vast majority of people around the median income, rather than some of the folks who have tools like pass-through income, which is a specific tool that most people never will have access to, or the state tax that only affects 2 out of every 1,000 people. So I think when we say, maybe it's easier to say the top 1% and 2%, and that's a good point, and we could do that more effectively, but in general, people seem to understand what we're talking about when we give a comparison of what the middle class is and those aspiring to be in the middle class.
Yeah, and these tax cuts are going to. This is clear now that Trump's tax proposals are going to raise taxes on the poorest among Americans.
Yeah, I mean, just by increasing the bottom rate, you're automatically on the poorest.
Right.
And then by taking away a lot of the deductions, at most 30% of middle class might benefit if they don't have children or don't use some of the tax deductions. But the vast majority are going to pay more to pay for this.
Yeah, majority are going to go through. Congressman Mark Pocan with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Middays with Mark. More of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan right after this. And welcome back. And Steve in Fairmount, Indiana. You are on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Hi.
Hey, Steve.
Thank you for having me. Sure. Congressman Pocan, I had a question for you. I keep seeing ads. It's put out by Americans for Prosperity about calling my senator and making sure that he passes Trump's tax bill. And I'm wondering if that's going on around the United States and if it has any effect.
We were certainly seeing them in D.C. Congressman?
Yeah, no, I'm sure they're doing it, and they're probably targeting even more in places like Wisconsin, where we have a competitive U.S. Senate race coming up. I think just the thing to remember is Americans for Prosperity is really Americans for the Prosperous. It's again, a conservative group funded by all the Koch brothers and all the folks that we know that are out there that have a specific agenda, and they'll even put the lie out there even more bald-faced than you'll see from perhaps the president and the speaker. So, they do ultimately have an effect. It's just they have the repetitious effect of putting that lie out there, which is why I think the more we can all get on the facts and tell the truth about it, this is a terrible tax plan, and I think that message will really get out there. That's exactly why Donald Trump has started his whole fake news mantra, because he doesn't want you to follow the actual facts, and he wants you to have to go to him for whatever his view of facts are. So, I do think it has an effect because they keep putting a lie out there. We just have to find our ways to put the truth out there.
Pam in Falls Creek, Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. I wanted to ask a question about a topic that came up recently on the program, and that is the teaching of civics in American public schools. And I wondered if there was any perspective that you know of or facts with regard to when that was initiated and whether it was on a state level, slowly, or on a national level. Thank you very much, both of you, for all that you do.
Thank you, Pam.
Sure, Pam. I know that this is a subject that we have often talked about. Is should you have a mandated civics taught? Because obviously it would provide people to be better citizens on multiple levels, and I think a lot of those things we would like to see happen. What I would argue is that if people feel like this is something they would like to see in their areas, that's where we could still have more effect is at the local and state levels. I mean, the federal government right now is trying to get a good idea done with this Congress, this Senate, and this president is going to be pretty much impossible. But we have states that have Democratic-controlled legislatures, Democratic governors. You have cities that have Democratic mayors or city councils or progressive-leaning ones. And I think that's where we can still impact changes. So if you have a good idea, and that is, I think, a good idea, let's try to get that done at the local level.
Okay. And let's see here. Joe in Battenport, Iowa. We got a minute to the break. Joe, quick question for the congressman.
Well, I'm just wondering if we don't get right to the point about a small percentage of the people controlling all of the money, how are they going to be able to create a vibrant economy? They don't spend, whereas the majority of people are the spenders. They need to break loose of historic amounts of profit, and they need to start doing what's right for the America, the patriotic people.
Okay, Joe, we'll pick up Congressman Pocan's answer to your question right after.
Have a nice day.
Thank you, Joe. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your questions. And Congressman, just a moment ago, Joe called and he kind of raised this issue that, for 7,000 years, from ancient Samaria through Adam Smith all the way up till 1980, pretty much every economist in the world agreed that economies are stimulated by demand, by people buying things. And that demand then echoes up through the economy and causes businesses to want to fill that demand by hiring new people and building new factories. And then Reagan came along and said, no. What drives the economy is supply, the amount of stuff out there, and therefore more rich people, more money, more supply, blah. And he's saying basically this is a crazy theory. How can we do anything as long as this is the dominant metaphor that's being used?
Yeah, and I was going to say to Joe, amen. I think the whole idea that if you give money to a few people on top and it might trickle down on some of us, that's an idea for economic development, when my argument has been if you put money in a bunch of people's hands, like by raising the minimum wage, for example, you will sell more sofas. More people will go out to eat and go to the movies and do things that actually stimulate the economy. But the very rich, how many sofas can you buy as a rich person? You just can't compete with putting the money at the grassroots level and letting it bubble up. So, a rising tide lifts all boats is my economic theory, and I think Joe put it well.
Okay. Gary in Phoenix, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, thank you. Listen, I just wanted to say a couple things. You had two callers there recently that disagreed with the congressman, said the Democrats need to be a little tougher. Make that three callers now. Mario Cuomo said about 30 years ago that the Republicans are like an Uzi. They have a lot of ammunition. None of it's accurate. And why don't we call them on that? And they are going to go after Social Security. They've been trying to do that for 30 years. Let's call it what it is. It's a lie. But now we have alternative facts. We have fake news because Democrats are afraid to call them on it.
Congress?
Yeah, Gary, so I think the other two, actually, they're arguing that they wanted to be more clear and concise on how we talk about the tax issue. I don't disagree with you. Make that four people who think Democrats have to be more aggressive. And I'm seeing that happen. The problem is if the corporate media don't pick that up, you would never know it, even though as a progressive caucus, we probably have several press conferences a week going very aggressively on these issues. So I think it's easy to say, God, they all stink, don't they? They're not doing their jobs, when in reality, I think a lot of people are getting the message very clear and very succinct and saying, they're lying to you. They're going to raise your taxes. They're taking away your health care. That's exactly the message that's coming out of many, many elected officials. But if it's not picked up by the corporate media, you're not necessarily going to have it. And if they only go to the same 20 people for comments, you may not be hearing it. But trust me, more people are doing that. And so I don't disagree with you. I would like more folks in leadership to maybe be a little more clear and but more succinct on it. But I've been seeing that happen more and more with President Trump. He's making our job awful easy in that regard.
Russ in Chicago, you're on with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, Mr. Pocan, I keep hearing about tax cuts. Maybe you can help me. Is this the same one I'm hearing? It's a $500 billion tax cut every year for 10 years, which adds up to $1.5 trillion. I don't hear how the Republicans are going to pay for this. And are you guys going to rescind that tax cut the day you take all three branches? Thank you.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't know if they're going to be able to pass this, Russ. I mean, they're having plenty of problems. So we're going to keep those efforts up to stop it. And I think at the end of the day, it'll be a scaled-down cut at best that they may get done just to say they got something done. But what you brought up in the beginning is exactly right. I mean, these folks claim that they care about the deficit and debt all the time, and then when it comes to this issue, they're like, well, don't worry, you're going to get some magical, mythical growth out of this that's never, ever going to occur. That's why you won't have an explosion of debt out of this. When, in the end of the day, either the middle class is going to pay for the tax cuts or they're going to boon the debt by doing this. And suddenly they don't seem to care about those issues. They want to pass on some mythological idea that instead this will spur this unbelievable amount of growth that no economist actually agrees with. Larry in Albuquerque, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, Congressman, I have a simple question here, a quick question. If, in fact, the tax reform bill is a tax cut for the rich, which we know it is, I assume that no Democrat will vote for that when it comes to a vote. And if a Democrat votes for that tax reform for the rich, then they're in somebody's pocket. So I'm saying if we have 100% of Democrats voting against it and pick up a couple of Republicans, wouldn't that be enough to not pass it? And those the same way that we did with the health care bill?
I agree with you. I think they're going to have a hard time because, again, I think there is near unanimity among Democrats against this. While they're certainly trying to court a few senators that are up in 2018 that they think are in swing districts, and they're trying to affect them to try to get them to vote for this. This current plan, it's very unlikely you're going to find any Democratic support, and they have a hard time getting all their Republicans on board. If that's true, and that is what the truth is right now, they can't pass this as is unless they make some changes to either first pick up their Republican support, and then maybe after that they'll try to come and get Democrats. But, there have been almost no efforts to actually do anything in a bipartisan way this session yet. I doubt, unless they're really desperate, and they're not going to be able to get it unless they have a very different plan than they're offering now.
Congressman, we just have a minute till the end of the hour. Thoughts on what we should be looking for this week and activism suggestions?
I think really the tax plan and health care are still the two big issues, and they're probably going to be for a while. But people should still be calling their members of Congress and their senators and making sure that they're expressing that they don't want to have a tax cut for the wealthy on the backs of the middle class, and that they should be making sure they're calling about health care and saying, don't you dare take away our health care, and fighting to get a fix to the Affordable Care Act, because I think that still is something that's viable in this Congress. So, and then to keep aspirational. I think for most of us, we want to go to Medicare for All, a single-payer system. It won't happen with Paul Ryan as Speaker, but that's why we're trying to do our best to make sure Paul Ryan's not Speaker in 2018.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. His website, pocan.house.gov. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today.
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you.
Great talking with you. We will be back. Right now.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from a book by an old acquaintance and colleague of mine, Alan Combs, who passed away this last year. The book is called Thank the Liberals. You're a liberal. If you think you're a conservative, that assertion is surely quite shocking. You may even be so upset upon reading this that you're considering either throwing this book down, shooting a hole in it with your shotgun, or even worse, burning it the way Florida Pastor Terry Jones burned the Koran. Or you may feel the need to toss this book aside even temporarily and find solace in your Bible. However, that's a fairly liberal book too, so it may not help you get any more comfortable than this one will. The very fact that you haven't done any of these things yet shows how open-minded you are. So don't disappoint and go all Terry Jones on me here. If right now you're saying, but Alan, there's no way I'm a liberal, just do me the favor of hearing me out. Exhibit A to prove my point that you're a liberal, maybe in conservative clothing, is that you're an American. If you're not an American, keep reading. You'll discover how great it is to be one. As an American, you're free right now to put this book down. Go outside for a walk, take a drive, or head to the nearest airport and fly anywhere in the world. Or you can stay home, go online, and get almost any information you want without it being firewalled by the government. And that's largely because liberals have stood up against such regulations as the Stop Online Piracy Act and the Protect IP Act, SOPA and PIPA, that would have squelched free speech on the internet and made criminals out of innocent content providers. This doesn't mean the government hasn't already overreached. When the government knows what websites you're going to because of the very unpatriotic Patriot Act, they're likely not paying too much attention to you and won't do anything about it. You want to leave your job, start a business, go to a food court, gorge out, just goof off. This is the land of the free, so go ahead after you're done with this book. America was founded on a liberal idea. The concept of a representative democracy without a state religion was a move leftward from the motherland, where the Church of England dictated certain laws and mores. Our forefathers thought that a state religion was repressive, and so they established one of our key tenets, freedom of and from religion. There can be no religious test to hold public office in America. That's liberal. A commander-in-chief who's a civilian, not a member of the military, it's liberal. Taxation with representation, that's liberal. A tripartite form of government where no one branch can rule over the others, yep, that's liberal too. Our founders, the ones conservatives revere so much, took these very liberal ideas and made them so much a part of our DNA that America is unthinkable without them. Let's look at some of the parts of our founding documents that often don't get enough press, but show how liberal we are simply because we're American. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution lays out the rights of Congress, stating in part that they have the right to, quote, lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, end quote. But the government is specifically charged with providing for the general welfare of our population has been much disputed by conservatives. Over time, liberals have fought for numerous items that fall in this category that have greatly benefited Americans, programs conservatives forgot they initially opposed. You'll read about them later in the chapter, Have You Thanked a Liberal Today? Article 1, Section 8 also guarantees your right to your personal intellectual property by saying that Congress has the right to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited time to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. If you invent something or write something, it's not the property of the government. This is why entrepreneurs and scientists flock to America. They know that here they are free to create and they will get the credit they deserve for their work. Our founding documents established a court system giving us a way to seek redress from grievances. The Constitution establishes the creation of various courts available for different purposes depending on the issue at hand. Congress has the authority to create bankruptcy courts and tax courts to handle specific issues. Article 3 says the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court
and in such inferior courts as Congress may from time to time ordain and establish, giving us a federal court system and an appeals process. Article 1, Section 9 gives us the right to seek relief from unlawful imprisonment. A prisoner or someone on his or her behalf can petition for a writ of habeas corpus, an order from the government that it has the right to detain the person in question. This protects us from being held arbitrarily by the state without evidence and without just cause. Our entire judicial system, outlined in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of our Constitution, is built on a liberal idea. The focus is on protecting the individual, especially the minority, from the tyranny of the majority. For example, the presumption of innocence, which is implied by the right to remain silent and the right to a jury, places the burden of proof on the prosecutor. The Fifth Amendment calls for grand juries to protect us from being prosecuted when there isn't enough evidence to bring a case against us. This amendment also guarantees that we can't be tried for the same crime twice, and that we are protected from having to testify against ourselves. This was originally written to guard against torture and forced confessions. Most important, we can't be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. If charged with a crime, there is a process in place to guarantee us a fair trial. This includes being given adequate notice to prepare a defense against those charges. The Fifth Amendment also contains the promise that the government can't take our property away without just compensation. We probably take all this for granted, but that's probably because we've never lived in a country where a terrifying knock on the door at 3 a.m. could mean a phony trial in a kangaroo court or a demand that we leave our homes because someone from the government needs or wants them. The Sixth Amendment continues the discussion of our judicial system through the promise that anyone accused of committing a crime has a right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of peers in the jurisdiction where the alleged crime was committed. You have the right to be told the charges against you, to confront your accuser in court, to have witnesses on your behalf, and to have counsel represent you. Thank the Liberals by Alan Hall.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There is a lot going on in the news and in the world today. I want to cover some of these things, but also I want to put it in a larger context, in a larger frame, and that is how, as I quoted Mark Twain, I think it was on Monday, in the op-ed I wrote for Alternet about how this is hardly the America that I grew up in. The America that I knew is largely gone. The small d democracy, the functioning democracy, is largely gone. And we should have seen the warning signs coming. And whether it's the defunding of the Children's Health Insurance Program, or whether it's the tax cut that's going to cut into both Medicare and Social Security, whatever it may be, and of course give great tax benefits to rich people and raise taxes on the working poor. No matter what it is, this is part of an old and long story. And Harry Truman addressed this in a big way a number of times. And I want to play a couple of clips from Harry Truman's his acceptance address. This was in 1948. He was the president of the United States at that point in time, but only because Franklin Roosevelt had a stroke and died in office. And so it was really his first. Harry Truman, first of all, he'd only been vice president for a couple of years. He was the third vice president that FDR had. And secondly, it was his first run for the White House. And so he's just, he's running for president on, okay, I've been president for a couple of years here, but, we've got to move this country forward, and we're going to take on the Republicans. This is Harry Truman, the president of the United States in 1948, accepting the Democratic nomination for his second term as president, which, of course, he won. Here he is.
The people know the Democratic Party is the People's Party, and the Republican...
Yeah, I'm going to start that over again. Here we go.
The people know the Democratic Party is the People's Party, and the Republican Party is the party of special interest, and it always has been and always will be.
Yeah, and apparently and it always will be is like shockingly true.
I'd like to say a word or two now about what I think
Republican philosophy is, and I'll speak from actions and from history and from experience. The situation in 1932 was due to the policies of the Republican Party control of the government of the United States.
That would be the Great Depression, Doug.
The Republican Party, as I said a while ago, favors the privileged few and not the common everyday man. Ever since its inception, that party has been under the control of special privilege, and they concretely proved it in the 80th Congress.
This was the one where they...
In the field of labor, we needed moderate legislation to promote labor management harmony. But Congress instead passed that so-called Taft-Hartley Act, which has disrupted labor management relations and will cause strife and bitterness for years to come if it's not repealed, and the Democratic platform says it ought to be repealed.
There you go. They've been calling for the repeal of Taft-Hartley ever since 1948, but it's still the law of the land, unfortunately.
I tried to strengthen the Labor Department. The Republican platform of 1944 said if they were in power, they'd build up a strong Labor Department. You know what they've done to the Labor Department? They've simply torn it up. There's only one bureau left that's functioning, and they cut the appropriation on that, so it can't hardly function. I recommended an increase in the minimum wage. What'd they get? Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
So this is not new.
I suggested that the schools in this country are crowded, teachers underpaid, that there are a shortage of teachers. One of the greatest national needs, more and better schools. I urge the Congress to provide $300 million to aid the states in meeting the present educational crisis.
And what did they do?
Congress did nothing about it.
Nothing about it. This is the 2 years Republicans...
Time and again, I have recommended improvements in Social Security law, including extending protection to those not now covered, increase the amounts of the benefits, reduce the eligibility age of women from 65 to 60 years. Congress studied the matter for 2 years but couldn't find time to extend the increased benefits, but it did find time to take Social Security benefits away from 750,000 people. And they passed that over my veto.
Right. And this was the 2 years that the Republicans controlled the House of Representatives, 47-48. The only 2
I've
years.
repeatedly asked the Congress to pass a health program. The nation suffers from lack of medical care. That situation can be remedied anytime the Congress wants to act upon it.
Harry Truman actually proposed single-payer health care in 48.
Everybody knows that I recommended to the Congress a civil rights program. I did so because I believe it to be my duty under the Constitution. Some of the members of my own party disagree with me violently on this matter, but they stand up and do it openly. People can tell where they stand. But the Republicans all profess to be for these measures. But the 80th Congress didn't fail to act, and they had enough men there to do it, and they could have had cloture. They didn't have to have a filibuster. There are enough people in that Congress that would vote for cloture.
The Republicans...
Now, everybody would like to have low taxes. But we must reduce the national debt in times of prosperity. And when tax relief can be given, it ought to go to those who need it most, and not go to those who need it least, as this Republican rich man's tax bill did when they passed it over my veto on the third try.
This is 1948. Are you starting to feel deja vu-ish? I mean, just listen to this list of issues. He continues.
The first one of these tax bills they sent me was so rotten that they couldn't even stomach it themselves. They finally did send one that was somewhat improved, but it still helps the rich and sticks the knife into the back of the poor. The Republican platform urges extending and increasing Social Security benefits. Think of that. Increasing Social Security benefits, and yet when they had the opportunity, they took 750,000 people off the Social Security roll.
The Republicans cut people from Social Security in 48.
I wonder if they think they can fool the people of the United States with such poppycock as that.
Yeah, they do think they can do it, and they've been doing it ever since 48.
The American people will not decide by listening to mere words
or by reading a mere platform. They'll decide on the record as it has been written.
If the media would report.
And in the record is the stark truth that the battle lines in 1948 are the same as they were back in 1932, when the nation lay prostrate and helpless as a result of Republican misrule and inaction. In 1932, we were attacking the citadel of special privilege and greed. We were fighting to drive the money changers from the temple. Today, in 1948, we are now the defenders of the stronghold of democracy and of equal opportunity. The haven of the ordinary people of this land, and not of the favored classes or the powerful few.
There you go. So that was Harry Truman in 1948 accepting the Democratic Party's nomination to run as their candidate for President of the United States for a second term. He accepted the nomination. He won. They used to call him Give him hell, Harry. And Harry Truman famously said, you know, they say I like to give them hell, but I just tell the truth and they think it's hell. The they that he's speaking of course, being the Republican Party and the Republicans. But what we're seeing here, I mean, Harry Truman just went through this list. They're tearing apart the Labor Department. Surprise! I mean, Reagan put that on steroids, but they're still working at it. You got an anti-labor guy running the Labor Department right now. They're cutting taxes on the rich and saying that they're cutting taxes for ordinary people and lying to us. They want to cut Social Security. In fact, they did cut Social Security in 1948, the Republicans. Harry Truman vetoed it, and they passed it again over his veto. Amazing. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
To bring this back around to today, more of the news of the day and your calls right after. And welcome back. Keith in New York City, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Keith, what's on your mind today?
Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk about, you were talking to Congressman Pocan earlier, and you had 3 callers come up and tell him that the messaging that the Democratic Party is not reaching the people. It almost seems like the Democratic Party is almost tanking on purpose. You know, at the end of the day, these congressmen aren't making enough money to benefit from these tax cuts. You're going out with a message, it's not resonating, and yet you keep beating the same drum. Kind of the reason why Donald Trump is the president now.
Yeah, if your implication, Keith, is that members of Congress, including Democratic members of Congress, would vote for this tax break program for the rich because they would benefit from it, I'm skeptical. Congressmen and women make, as I recall, around $180,000 a year. That's, I don't believe, enough to kick in the alternative minimum tax for most people. And so the tax, which is the main thing Donald Trump wants to get rid of. He paid $25 million in ATM tax, AMT, alternative minimum tax. He paid $25 million in that tax in 2005, I think, or 2000, whatever the year is. We've got 1 year of his tax returns. I'm pretty sure it was 2005. And that was pretty much the only tax he paid. So he's trying to get rid of that. That is not going to affect people at the level of income of members of Congress. You really have to make into the $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year before, or more. I mean, in the case of Trump, it was, I think tens of millions of dollars he made that year. Secondly, members of Congress can't use the pass-through option, which these billionaires who have privately held companies, whether it's the Kochs or Adelson or whatever, all these billionaires are saying, hey, let us pass this through onto our personal taxes and only pay a maximum 15% income tax. That isn't anything that Congress can use for themselves. The top tax rate that they want to drop from 39% down to 35% doesn't kick in until somebody makes over $300,000 a year. So members of Congress don't make that. I don't see, Keith, where there's any benefit to even Republican members of Congress in Trump's tax bill, because it mostly benefits the really, really wealthy and mostly hurts people making arguably less than $30,000 a year because they're in the bottom tax bracket, maybe less than $40,000 a year. So does that make sense, Keith? Apparently. Okay. Tony in Shirley, New York. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how are you doing today?
Good. We got a minute to the break, though, Tony.
Okay, great. Listen, I was curious. It seems to be that the Democratic Party seems to be co-opting the Bernie progressive faction of the progressives, and I was wondering what we can do to avert that, and why they're having so much success in doing it as it is right now.
Well, I think we should embrace it. You know, if the Democratic Party is saying, hey, you guys have got some energy, come on in, and then we go in and we end up taking over the party, what's the downside to that?
Well, it seems to be that they normally, when they bring them in, they seem to liquidate the message, so to speak, and bring it back to the original platform that they were running on back during the Hillary days, so to speak.
Well,
And, that's my primary
I would disagree with that, Henry. Or excuse me, Tony.
That's okay.
Yeah, thank you. The whole DLC thing that Bill Clinton and Al Fromm put together back in the late 80s and became Bill Clinton's support group in the 90s, that has largely fallen apart. And the consensus of that group, the free trade and cut taxes on the rich and welfare as we know it and all that kind of stuff, I think that consensus has collapsed in the Democratic Party by and large as well. So I'm actually optimistic, Tony. I'm seeing good signs. Tony, thanks for the call.
On April 5th.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone. You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
To take this from Harry Truman in 1948 to the Democratic Party and the pushback against the Republicans today in 2017, in October of 2017, we're seeing quite literally, as you got from hearing that rather long, it was about a 4-minute clip of Harry Truman in 1948, talking about the things that the Republicans were focused on. The Republicans were focused on cutting Social Security. In fact, in 48, they successfully cut 700,000 people off the Social Security rolls. Harry Truman vetoed it, and they passed it again over his veto. They passed Taft-Hartley so that they could destroy organized labor. Taft-Hartley is the legislation that authorizes states to become so-called right-to-work-for-less states, meaning that the state can continue to force the union to pay for all the expenses of the people who work for the company, whether they're members of the union or not. So the union still has to negotiate on the behalf of all the workers. The union still has to provide lawyers at no cost to any worker who wants to take on the company. The union still has to defend all the workers and all of their interests, but the union gets no money from the workers for that. This is how, of course, you destroy unions, is for the right to work for less legislation. And this was created, this loophole in the 1935 National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act. That loophole was created in 1947 with Taft-Hartley, which was passed by the Republicans in Congress, and Harry Truman vetoed it, and they passed it over his veto. Another thing that they passed over his veto. So we're seeing like deja vu all over again, and how it is that Americans, 1948 was what, 70 years ago, roughly, and 71 years ago, if I'm doing the math in my head fast enough, and for us to have 71 years of continuous and consistent Republican sucking up to billionaires and big corporations and dumping all over, stepping on the interests and concerns of average working Americans for 71 years. Now, obviously, they've been doing it a lot longer than that. It was just 71 years ago that Harry Truman called them out. although he'd been calling them out for some time. Why is it that Americans haven't figured out what the Republican Party is all about? Well, could it have something to do with the media? Much of our media being owned by very conservative corporations and very conservative billionaires like Rupert Murdoch? Could be. Who knows? So we have the Credo Action sent out an email this morning. Tell Congress, save CHIP now. CHIP is the Children's Health Insurance Program. This was passed during the Clinton administration. In fact, it was one of Hillary Clinton's big accomplishments. She didn't, propose the legislation specifically, but she was the big champion for this in the Clinton White House. And it's a very successful program. When it was put into place in 1997, 14% of American children had no access to health care. Now that number is 4.5%. And the reason why is largely because the Children's Health Insurance Program has been filling in the gaps in states all over the country, particularly red states. In fact, the state that's most at risk of running out of money for CHIP is Nevada. That's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. And what CHIP does is it allows low and middle income children and pregnant women to get preventative health checkups, immunizations, dental and vision care, lab work and x-rays, and emergency services. And basically it pays for these things. And as the folks at Credo Action point out, allowing federal funding for CHIP to expire shows that Republicans are incapable of governing. Right-wing Republican Senators Lindsey Graham and Bill Cassidy derailed legislation to renew CHIP when they introduced their latest version of Trump Care in September. So, I mean, this is amazing. Instead of advancing a bill to reauthorize CHIP, Republicans put the full weight of their caucus behind legislation that would have stripped health care away from low-income people and children, women, seniors, and sick people just to give Donald Trump the, quote, win, end quote, he so desperately wanted. Meanwhile, it's dangerous to always reflexively disagree with somebody that you oppose. Donald Trump and the Trump White House, there are many areas where I completely disagree with them. Trade is not one of those areas. Damian Paletta, writing in today's Washington Post, internal White House documents allege manufacturing decline increases abortions, infertility, and spousal abuse. Peter Navarro is the director of the White House Office of Trade and Manufacturing Policy. Peter's been on this program many times. They say that he presented this list without data or information to back it up, and basically suggesting that weakened manufacturing base leads to lost jobs, depressed wages, closed factories, and those lead to things like higher divorce rate, increased drug and opioid use, rising mortality rate, and a higher abortion rate. Now, there's a number of people who are basically ridiculing the Trump administration and Peter Navarro for suggesting this connection, saying, why? How could that be? Well, it is. And so-called free trade has gutted our manufacturing base in the United States. Before Reagan started introducing this stuff in a big way in the 1980s, the United States, literally in 1980, we were the largest exporter of finished goods in the world. We were the world's largest manufacturer. We were also the world's largest importer of raw materials. That's the definition of a first world country. You bring in raw materials, you ship out finished goods. You manufacture things. By the end of the Reagan presidency, we had become the world's largest importer of finished goods, the world's largest exporter of raw materials, and gone from being the world's largest creditor to the world's largest debtor, which is where we're still at.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So in my humble opinion, the Trump White House, while they may get a lot of the details muddled, the broad principles that Peter Navarro's laying out are actually accurate.
For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Schenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners in the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The whole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction. The disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. The most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, and infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it. And then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book. Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shen. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Gabe Ortiz writing over at the Daily Kos. Judge orders Trump administration to turn over all documents relating to their decision to end DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. This is the Dreamers, essentially, program, leaving 800,000 undocumented immigrant youth vulnerable. He notes, initially, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III sent a one-page memo to the Department of Homeland Security explaining why DACA was, quote, an open-ended circumvention of immigration laws that was an unconstitutional exercise of authority by the executive branch. America's, end of quote, America's most racist Keebler-Elf claimed. But the judge says that's just not enough of an explanation. This is U.S. District Judge William Alsup, based out of San Francisco. And he says defendants argue that the Department of Homeland Security had to rescind DACA because it exceeded the lawful authority of the agency. They cannot, therefore, simultaneously refuse to disclose the legal research that led to that conclusion. Plaintiffs are entitled to challenge whether this was a reasonable legal position and thus reasonable basis for rescission. In making that challenge, plaintiffs are entitled to review the internal analyses that led up to this change in position. So, yeah, we'll see where this goes. A second judge has ruled against Trump's travel ban, by the way, saying that Trump's own words showed that it was aimed at Muslims. Matt Zapotsky writing about that in the Washington Post. So a lot going on in the world today. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi. Do you mind if I switch? Because that question I wanted to give to the congressman, and we've had that talk.
Oh, that's fine. What do you want to talk about, Bill?
Yeah, about the fact that the Republicans just woke up to the fact that Obamacare is paying off the insurance companies so that they can keep a profit. And they're coming at this like it's something brand new they didn't know about, right. And that we're doing like corporate welfare and picking winners and losers and that whole crazy thing. And I don't understand how it's hard or to advocate for morals, to advocate for millions of people who must die or will die because of these policies. And one last thing, you were talking about the worst president. It was definitely Harding because of his Reaganomics 1.1 led to the killing of 100 million people in World War II.
Yeah. Okay, Bill, thank you. Well said. Don in Jackson, Michigan. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
Oh, what's on my mind is Jackson, Michigan is the birthplace of the Republican Party. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, it was in June of 1856 when they had their first meeting there, as I recall.
Yep, that's true. Now, the way I tackle the Obamacare situation here is when it all came out, they looked at it as something that President Obama was shoving down everybody's throat. So I simply put it to people, I says, in American history, what we all have ever strived for was to have a house and a car to get around with and to lead a good life. Now, the house and the car are two of the most important things in our lives. Don't we have to have insurance on those?
Yeah.
Before we could drive a car, we have to have insurance.
Right, and
we have to have insurance. If something happens, we need to be able to replace it.
Right, and if you have a mortgage, it's required.
And I say, aren't your kids worth that? If you have to have insurance on yourself and your kids, aren't they at least worth as much as your house and your car? So that makes a lot of people think, and I think it puts it into perspective a little more than just calling it Obamacare. See, and what we do around here, we say, it's not Obamacare. It's President Obama cares about affordable health care. And the only way we're going to get that is to have everybody on board helping each other out, whether you're, and like so many people realize, young people are going to get old. They're going to get sick. So we all have to have that built into our lives, just like it's built into our lives for our homes and our cars. Now, I'm a single person. I don't have kids, but I have a lot of nephews, and I have a lot of people around me. And I don't mind paying for health insurance, whatever that might be, because my life's worth it, my family's life's worth it, and my neighbors' lives are worth it.
Yeah, Don, you've established a great framing device, and it's a variation on one that I've been using for years, which is we all pay into our local taxes to pay for our local fire departments. Because if any of our houses catch on fire, we want that fire put out. All of us. Whether it's a homeowner or a renter, no matter what it may, or a business, whatever it may be, we all agree that putting out fires in homes and businesses is a really important thing. So, and so much so that we're willing to tax ourselves for it, and that this is a relatively non-controversial issue. Republicans and Democrats both support taxes to have fire departments. So if we're going to support taxing ourselves to put out fires in our homes, why would we not support taxing ourselves to put out fires, metaphorically, in our bodies? When your body is infected with something, you've got pneumonia or you've got cancer or whatever it may be. When your body is on fire, metaphorically speaking, when your body's in a crisis, shouldn't we all be the fire department? Shouldn't there be the equivalent of that? And which is just a variation on what you're saying. And Don, you said it very, very well. Thank you very much for the call. Paul in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi, the only thing I could add to that quickly is there's still 30 million people without health insurance with Obamacare. So
you're right.
We have
and that's the result of the
talking.
Supreme Court, by the way.
And originally, I'm calling mainly for the football dilemma, but I have to say this first. The last time I called you, I said you should run as vice president with Bernie, and you talked me down, but I just picture you as being our president. You could solve so many of our problems. But okay, I know you don't like that kind of talk, so let me get back to...
No, that's fine. Well, although, Paul, you did remind me, Arthur, who's our call screener here, pointed out to me during the break that several people called. Both of them were unwilling to go on the air and say it, but they called in to say, Harry Truman sounds a lot like Bernie Sanders. And, and all Bernie has been doing is trying to bring the Democratic Party back to its roots. And yeah, of course, Truman and Bernie sound alike. But anyhow, back to you, Paul. You wanted to talk about the NFL.
We can't get Truman again, but we still have Thom Hartmann.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll get back to my subject, football. I've been trying to promote a suggestion, and I was trying to mainly contact some black progressive commentators who I believe might have connections with the Football League. And I've sent them email and having difficulty, and somehow they're not even on the programs like they used to be. You got to get up early in the morning to talk to them. But I believe possibly you might know them, and you might convey the message to them, the suggestion. It's a simple one. Our president uses the American flag on his lapel, and that's supposed to make him a patriot. But I believe the real patriots that are concerned about my country are on their knees. So my suggestion is that when they get down on their knees and they're being accused not to be good Americans, they all should have the right hand on their heart, and the left hand, they should be holding a flag. A simple thing, but I can't see anybody complaining and calling or stopping them from doing that. That's all. And if you can convey that to somebody, or if you have contacts and you think it's a good idea, then I'd like to see you promote.
Paul, I'm sorry that I don't know anybody in the NFL, but or in the players' organizations, but you just made a really, I think it's a very good suggestion, that 6 million people heard. And so hopefully at least one of them knows somebody who can pass it along. I think it's a great suggestion, Paul. Thanks a lot for the call. Rich in Greenwood, Indiana. Hey, Rich, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks a lot. I want to piggyback on a trending topic, and that is communication style and what people are able to hear as there is a communicator working to get a point across.
Right.
Somebody said when Mr. Procan was on about communication style of Democrats, and then tried to critique it. And you wrote that cool book. I think it's called Cracking the Code.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, back in 2008.
You were discussing communication style and cognition. And what I remember from a discussion about Trump, and when he was first being run at for his fraud at his Trump University, that people who were the victims were being marketed to in a condition of they're feeling insecure and additionally ambitious. And so these things were being played off from one another, and people were able to be duped.
Yeah.
There's something that you talked about, and I don't know what its label is, but it's the idea of when someone is listening, they're listening for what they know and what they agree with, and the speaker can throw a word salad at them in a shotgun approach. And even if stuff is contradictory in that cloud, people will hear what they want, seize on it, say, I agree with that.
Yeah.
That's my guy.
You're right, Rich. And this is why I actually agree with the caller who suggested that this Trump budget cuts Medicare and cuts Social Security. And in my opinion, that's a much stronger thing for Democrats to scream about than the fact that the Republicans are lying about who's the principal beneficiary. Rich, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
For a lot of people, well, particularly for older people, cutting Medicare and cutting Social Security is a BFD. It's a big deal. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Gary in Kingmont, West Virginia. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you. Just a couple observations. Number one, you're talking about taxes. That reminds me of the philosophy, which we just don't understand in America, too many of us, and that is, and it's not mine, but taxes are what you pay for a civilized society. That's what you're talking about.
Yep.
Really.
To paraphrase Samuel Johnson, yes.
We don't. There's too many of us now because of all the money God bless people have. They're not thinking about the rest of us.
Yeah.
About taxes paid for a civilized society, health insurance, just the normal things in life. As you point out for years, the commons is part of the commons.
Yep.
So a couple things. You talked about Harry Truman. Earlier, we talked about history has repeated itself. You gave another example. One more example that I want to follow with a quick thing about statesmanship. How about 1984? Well, we'll reverse the years, 48 to 1984. There was a perfect example.
Yep.
How history rather recently, has repeated itself. And who said this? The Republicans, the repukes. Comforting the comfortable. That's their philosophy. Who said that? Walter Mondale.
Mm-hmm.
And
he didn't call them repukes, but he said their policy is to comfort the comfortable. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's a classic example what describes what's going on in America today. And I'd just like to close, if I may, with statesmanship. It means a lot. It's very dear to my heart. There's very few of them today, but there's some up-and-comers. You're right, in the Democratic Party we need to pay attention to. But Edmund Burke said, statesmanship is simply this. It's a disposition to preserve and an ability to improve. Taken together is statesmanship.
Mm-hmm. And Edmund Burke was the most famous conservative, or one of the most famous conservatives of the late 18th century.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
He's the guy
He's the guy who Thomas Paine stayed at his home for 2 weeks while he was on his way to France to participate in and cheer on the French Revolution, not realizing that as soon as he got to France, they were going to arrest him and throw him in prison, and then James Monroe was going to have to, bail him out, basically. But Thomas Paine got so angry with Edmund Burke in the 2 weeks that he stayed at his home that he wrote an entire book rebutting him, which is called The Rights of Man. And, and Edmund Burke was the one who famously said, it does me, a quote, by the way, that is used in Russell Kirk's book, The Conservative Mind, his 1951 book. It was Edmund Burke who said, it does me no harm if a man is allowed to engage in a profession as servile as that of hairdresser or candlemaker, but it does society considerable violence if such a man is allowed to participate in governance, in other words, to vote. And so Edmund Burke in the 1790s was arguing that working people should not be allowed to vote, only aristocrats. That was the conservative position back then. Of course, that's obviously the conservative position right now as well, which is why they're working so hard to push, average working people off the voting roll. But excellent points all, Gary. Thanks a lot for the call. Edmund Burke is a fascinating character. There's quite a bit about him in my book, Screwed, which I wrote back 2003 or 4 or something like that. And because he really is the father, the great-great-grandfather of the modern conservative movement. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, a new book by Ellen Ratner. On the line with us with Talk Media News is Doug Christian. Doug, welcome.
Hello. How are you doing today, Tom?
Very good. Hey, it's nice talking to you on the radio instead of just TV. So what's going on in the world today, Doug?
Well, I'm astonished by your conversation about Edmund Burke because, of course, he was a proponent of maintaining strong moral values. And, of course, we talk about Donald Trump, and I don't really think of Edmund Burke.
Right.
Anyway.
Right. Conservatives have, the whole conservative movement has really slid a long way down the hillside since Edmund Burke.
Well, yeah, and I think, and I ask my conservative friends to reflect on this time because this time will end, and then you'll have to justify why you supported this human being.
Yeah. So, what's going on in the world today, Doug?
Well, Forbes, of course, has reported that Donald Trump's fortune dropped by $600 million last year. Due to a very large lawsuit and also Amazon's taking over bricks and mortar stores. So his rental for Nike store hasn't worked out quite the way he had anticipated. And Roy Moore, of course, has 24,000 Russian Twitter followers now.
Oh, seriously? Somebody hired a Russian a Russian troll farm to work on behalf of Roy Moore.
Well, they deny it, but it's an amazing illustration because what it shows is that if Russians are disrupting this election, that they have never been actually for one party or another, but they are for disrupting the American election system.
Well, here's the question in my mind, Doug. I read a fairly in-depth piece in, I think it was the Washington Post yesterday or the day before about this Russian troll farm. And in that article, they pointed out that it's a for-profit business. It's not the Russian government. And so the question is, who wrote the check? I mean, if you want to hire fake Twitter accounts, if you want to hire fake Facebook accounts, if you want to hire people to comment on articles, whether it's in the New York Times, the Washington Post, or in more obscure places, Alternet or Common Dreams or something, the cheapest place in the world, apparently, where you can hire these folks is Russia, Ukraine, and some of the former Eastern European countries, the former Soviet countries, because their ability to do tech stuff has exploded fairly rapidly, whereas their physical infrastructure for other things like manufacturing, like is going on in China, has not kept up with it. So So, if you wanted to hire an American to do this kind of troll work for you, you'd have to pay $15, $20 an hour. You can hire Russians to do it for you for $2 an hour. So the question in my mind is, who wrote the check? Who paid for this? Was it paid for by the Russian government? I'm frankly skeptical of that, but I'd like to know. Or, in the case of the 2016 campaign, I'm guessing a lot of that Russian troll farm stuff that we know happened and we know was paid for by Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn. Or this guy Smith, Peter Smith, I think his name is, the guy who died, who has now come out and, before he died, came out and said, yes, I was the guy who was approaching the Russians about this.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, why wouldn't it be the Russian government itself? I mean, after all, the IC, the intelligence community, said that disrupting the American election came from the very top, and that means Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, it may well be. I would love to see some evidence.
Yeah.
There is none as of this moment, but I would love to see some evidence of that.
Yeah, and I'm sure that this evidence will continue to trickle out in various ways, both through committee hearings and as well as leaks.
Well, if it turns out that Manafort or anybody, Peter Smith, Michael Flynn, anybody, Don Trump Jr., if anybody with the Trump campaign was hiring people in a foreign country to troll our elections, then that is going to present a real interesting question of whether that is illegal or unconstitutional, or whether that's just, the modern day equivalent of outsourcing in the political arena rather than outsourcing, like General Electric outsourcing their back office operations to India because they can get CPAs to work for $10,000 a year in India, or Microsoft for that matter, outsourcing so many of their operations. They've got tens of thousands of engineers in India. Again, because you can get a master's level or PhD level engineer in India for $10,000, $15,000 a year, and here in the United States it'd be $100,000, $150,000. So,
right.
Anyhow, what else is going on in the world, Doug?
Well, of course, we, as we know, two senators reached a bipartisan agreement to prop up the insurance market. And what's so interesting about that is not only did the senators, that was Lamar, Alexander, and Murray, come together on this, but now Donald Trump says he supports this. And it's interesting because, of course, Donald Trump had said the day before that he didn't want to support the insurance markets.
Right.
So,
and his rationale was that we're simply supporting their profits. Well, what are you doing with all your military spending?
Right. I mean, that's exactly right.
if you're buying anything from a for-profit company, whether it's outsourcing your KP duties or whether it's building tanks or whatever it is, if you're buying anything from a for-profit company, of course you're subsidizing their profits, which is a strong argument for not privatizing things. But the privatization has already been done in a large part. And, and our health insurance, of course, has always been privatized. And, except for the pieces like Medicare and Medicaid that we're starting to pick up. I'd like to see us pick up the whole thing with Medicare for All.
Absolutely. I mean, it's crazy that this is a for-profit enterprise when, in fact, people don't choose to get sick. It's not their fault they get sick. They get sick because they're mortals. They're human beings.
Yeah.
Human beings, and
no one here gets out alive.
Right. Exactly.
Eventually, the Grim Reaper visits all of us, and
100% likelihood.
Yeah, and his various toadies on the path to it.
Exactly. You got it.
Yeah.
So, and then, of course, the immigration ban has been rejected by the courts for a third time.
Yes. I was just talking about that a minute ago. Doug, we're out of time, but Doug Christian with Talk Media News. Doug, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's a great pleasure.
Great talking to you, as always. We will be back. Stick around. Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
From United Nations.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Our Thom Hartmann University book review of the day is Richard Belzer's new book, Corporate Conspiracies, How Wall Street Took Over Washington. This is from the introduction. Of all the books we researched for this work, the title we loved the most was this one, Regime Change Begins at Home, Freeing America from Corporate Rule. We loved it because it presents as a hard fact something that very few people completely understand. And then he quotes from that book. Since 1980, America has been run by a corporate regime that has co-opted both political parties and shifted sovereignty from we the people to transnational corporations. End of quote. Since this book covers some corporate conspiracies, we will no doubt take a lot of heat for that and be deridingly referred to as conspiracy theorists. So we would just like to remind people that the phrase conspiracy theorist was actually invented by the Central Intelligence Agency, be used as a weaponized term with which to discourage people from seeking the truth. We kid you not. CIA document 1035-960, dated April 1, 1967, regarding the agency's concern about the reputation of the American government, in quotes. That document also suggested various tactics for countering, quote, conspiratorial arguments, which confronted the gaping holes critics observed in the findings of the Warren Commission, which investigated, in quotes, they really did no such thing in reality, the assassination of President Kennedy. Quote, the agency also directed its members to employ propaganda assets to negate and refute the attacks of the critics, end quote. So as you can see, and as the Freedom of Information Act release of that CIA document clearly reveals, the use of the term conspiracy theorist is actually a conspiracy itself. But if you believe rightly that Julius Caesar and hundreds of other leaders were the victims of conspirators, as they were, then you're an evil conspiracy theorist, right? Well, if anybody actually believes that, then you better read up on your history, boys and girls, because conspiracies are an ongoing and very common occurrence in human conduct. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Are you aware that many friends of Robin Williams believe that his suicide was the direct result of the prescription drugs he was taking, and that over 23,000 suicides are attributed to psychiatric drugs each year in the United States? Did you know that turning prisons into a big business has resulted in the United States having the highest incarceration rate in the history of the world, and that most are just drug crimes? Are you aware that the historic event of the toppling of the statue of Saddam Hussein in Iraq was actually a U.S. military PSYOPs, psychological operations warfare, program, a completely orchestrated event with the knowledge and assistance of U.S. media, and not a spontaneous event as it was portrayed by our media? Did you know that the Pentagon is sending $1.5 trillion of our tax dollars to their corporate buddies for a new fighter jet that's already superfluous? Are you aware that continuing to rely on oil instead of investing in low-carbon energy solutions will cost us $44 trillion due to climate change? Did you know that companies like General Motors at times know that their products will kill people, but they do nothing because it's actually cheaper to compensate the victims than it is to correct the problem? Then read and learn on, friends. American corporations have been getting away with murder, literally, for many, many years. Just take a good look at their history. The above example of GM is a proven point. Corporate consumer advocate Clarence Ditlow, executive director of the nonprofit Center for Automotive Safety, bitterly criticized the settlement. Quote, GM killed over 100 people by knowingly putting a defective ignition switch into over 1 million vehicles, Ditlow said. Today, thanks to its lobbyists, GM officials walk off scot-free while its customers are 6 feet under. Tobacco companies knowingly
lied about the harmful effects of cigarettes for decades, even though there was plenty of known medical proof of their damage. They even knowingly hid that information from the public. Oil, gas, and chemical companies have been knowingly polluting our planet with cancer-causing chemicals and products also for decades, and they know that they're doing it. Pharmaceutical companies have lied and attempted to minimize news coverage regarding the deaths that they know the drugs will cause. That's murder, plain and simple. Maybe you can paint a public relations damage control over that landscape if you happen to have all their tons of money and paid political influence, but it's still murder. Look at the parents of one of their victims straight in the eye and try and tell them it's not murder. Do you honestly think they'll listen to you? This book is an effort to reveal the insanity of corporate greed once and for all. At this point, most people probably care more about their local football team than they do about the workings of our democratic republic. And while we understand their frustration and their reasons, that's not good enough, folks. We have to all get involved to stop these bastards from getting away with what they've been getting away with for far too long. They're robbing us blind, poisoning our planet, hijacking our democracy, and ruining the futures of our children and grandchildren. They must be stopped. As an agent of the U.S. government employed to implement policies to benefit U.S. corporations, John Perkins noted in his classic work, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that corporate America has extended its rule beyond our borders. Quoting from Perkins, what we had previously considered U.S. corporations were now truly international, even from a legal standpoint. Many of them were incorporated in a multitude of countries. They could pick and choose from an assortment of rules and regulations under which to conduct their activities, and the multitude of globalizing trade agreements and organizations made this even easier. Corporatocracy had become a fact, and it increasingly exerted itself as the single major influence on world economics and politics. Sad to make this observation, but we have become a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I wanted to talk to you about collective narcissism, about national narcissism. We've been talking a lot on this program and in many other venues since really about a year and a half, 2 years ago, when Donald Trump was jumping into the Republican race, about his particular malignant narcissism, this form of narcissism that has become so extreme that it's become a pathology, that it's actually destructive. It's not just destructive to him, but it's destructive to the people around him and to the things he tries to do. It's one of the reasons why so many of his businesses have failed. One of the reasons why he's had to declare bankruptcy so many times. One of the reasons why he has made so many enemies in the business world. And it's just, his narcissism. It's me, my, mine. That's Donald Trump's mantra. Whether he's talking about, a mother that he actually, after he was embarrassed by the press, reached out to try to console. And then he says to her, the mother of a fallen soldier who died, 2 weeks ago in Niger. By the way, 4 Americans dying in a distant country and the president not taking responsibility for it. Wasn't that what the Republicans were screaming about with Trump, with Obama and Benghazi? I mean, what have I missed here? How is this any different than Benghazi? But in any case, so, Trump comes out and says, this grieving mother, first of all, comes out and very clearly and directly says, no, Donald Trump said that, by the way, her name is Maisha Johnson, and not the woman or the wife, the wife of the soldier who died. And it's a symptom of this malignant narcissism. So Bobby Azarian over at Raw Story has a really interesting piece titled "Psychologists Reveal How Trump Tunes Into America's Collective Narcissism." And I would add that not only has he tuned into it, but he is amplifying it. The University of Warsaw found support for Trump to be linked to something called national collective narcissism, an unrealistic but shared belief in the greatness of the national group. And they talk about individual narcissism predicts interpersonal aggressiveness, whereas collective narcissism, and that's what we're talking about here, the number of people in the United States who have bought into this narcissistic idea that Americans are unique from anybody else on earth and therefore superior to anybody else on earth. And that therefore superior part is the part where it gets toxic. I mean, there is nothing inaccurate about saying this group of people is different than this group of people because of their height, because of their weight, because of their race, because of their national origin, because of their language, whatever it may be, because of their religion. To say, they're different in these regards, I mean, that's just factual, right? But to say that they are inferior or that we are superior in specific or general regards, that is where you get into this group narcissism or collective narcissism. And when the in-group, so you get a group of people who say, we're the ones who are the greatest in the world. And of course, the group that's saying that is mostly white men and secondarily white people. And, we're the best there ever was, right? And when that in-group perceives itself as being disadvantaged, writes Bobby Azarian over at Raw Story, when they perceive themselves as being disadvantaged comparing to outsider groups as opposed to the in-group, right? So this would be white people pointing to anybody who's not a white person. Perceives themselves as being disadvantaged compared to outgroups who are getting ahead of them unrightfully. That's known as group relative deprivation. In other words, the perception that our superior group, we are the best, and those inferior people are stealing from us. That's the narrative. Now, when you say it that blankly, that straightforwardly, that without embellishment or whatever, it sounds pretty crude. It sounds pretty crass. But that is the essence of the lawsuits, about for quote reverse affirmative action, the sales pitch, Donald Trump's sales pitch about we're going to build a border wall. So much of this stuff, the racism that is embedded in the Republican Party and in Donald Trump, and not to say it's absolutely absent from the Democratic Party either, but this has become essentially an article of faith in the Republican Party, that white people are under siege. And collective narcissism is when the group believes that they are the true representatives of the nation. In this case, white people. We're the true representatives, like that. And so what the author, Bobby Azarian, the author of this piece, writes, he says, by speaking to his supporters, an overwhelmingly white group, as being true patriots or real Americans. Just think about that for a minute. True patriots. In other words, there are people who are patriots, but they're not true patriots. And real Americans. There are Americans who are not real Americans, but they're actually Americans. By speaking to his supporters, an overwhelmingly white group, as being true patriots or real Americans, Donald Trump promotes a brand of populism that is the epitome of identity politics. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The right is constantly ragging on the left. The Republicans, actually, are constantly ragging on Democrats, saying, oh, you're all about identity politics. You just want to be nice to black people so that they'll vote for you, which is essentially what Republicans mean when they're using that phrase, identity politics. You just want to be nice to gay people so they'll vote for you. You just want to be, respectful of women so that they'll vote for you. This is what Republicans are saying. And at that level of identity politics, it can be kind of treacherous territory, because if you are just sucking up to any particular group just because you want their vote, not because you actually understand their issues or care about their issues, then you are at considerable risk. And I would say the Republican Party has been doing that with the white working class for, you heard Harry Truman from 71 years ago, for a longer than I've been on this. But the thing that's interesting about left-wing identity politics versus right-wing identity politics is that left-wing identity politics, Democratic Party identity politics, is generally the core of it, the core message, is we're all in this together. We are all family here in this country, regardless of the color of our skin, regardless of our gender identity, regardless of who we think we are or what we look like or how we speak or where we came from or what religion we practice or who we love, regardless of any of that, we are all in this together. That's the identity politics on the left. The identity politics on the right is we're the true patriots, right-wing white guys, and if you're not with us, you're not a real American or a true patriot. In other words, it's almost the mirror image. It's like the bizarro universe of identity politics on the right, where they're saying, if you don't identify yourself with us, then you're not a real American. You're not a true patriot, to use Donald Trump's words. And that form of identity politics, that's, I keep pointing out that it's when you say, and therefore we're better, that it gets toxic. This is Hitler pointing out that there are going after the Jews and identifying that, hey, it's a separate religion. Yes, of course. But then saying, and therefore the German white race is superior. That's when it got dangerous. And this is the thing that these Republicans are flirting with. It's not healthy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with your calls, my thoughts, and more of the news of the day right after. And welcome back. And see here, Henry in Phoenix, Arizona, watching on Free Speech TV. Hey, Henry, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my call. Sure. I got a question, then I'll shut up and see if you can answer them. I'm interested in Bernie Sanders' health plan, and there's a lot of things about it I don't understand. Now, first of all, the way I do it, I deal through an insurance company. I pay them so much per month. They give me an ID card. When I go to the doctor, I submit the ID card. They, in turn, bill the insurance company. The insurance company pays them minus the deductible that I pay.
Right.
Okay. The second question I have is...
well, where's the question to that? You identified something, but I didn't hear a question.
Yeah, well, that was my first...
that's the premise. Okay.
Okay, maybe this is the question part. What steps are necessary for his plan to come into effect? I understand he's got it completed, but does he have to submit it to the CBO office and then go through the Senate and then the House and then in front of the President for approval or disapproval?
Well, you would want it to be scored by the CBO, and most legislation that's going to involve money and something that's going to involve, a significant portion, some people say a sixth of our economy, is healthcare, definitely should be submitted to the CBO for a score. The essence of Bernie's plan, as I understand it, and we're going to have to get somebody from our revolution on to talk about this, maybe bring in Larry Cohen or something to lay out the details of it. But the essence of his plan, as I understand it, is simply lowering the eligibility age for Medicare to 0. And, if we do that, then we'll have a system that we all understand. With Medicare, you pay, anywhere from $100, a little more than $100 to a little more than $300 a month, depending on how much you earn. And if you're in a high income bracket, you pay more into Medicare than if you have no income or if you're on Social Security. And then Medicare covers 80% of everything because the Republicans drilled that 20% hole into it to make room for private companies to make a profit on Medicare. I would like to get rid of that and just have Medicare pay for everything, and I believe Bernie's plan does that. But even if it doesn't, it's still, expanding Medicare. So it's funded out of the general fund, or it's funded out of the Medicare trust fund, and which is funded by the FICA tax, and it's funded by several other parts of the federal budget, and you pay a monthly fee into it, and there may be deductibles and copays. Although I know that Bernie wants to try and get rid of those as much as possible. Am I making sense here, Henry?
Last question. What's your gut feeling on it? Do you think it's a good plan, and do you think it has a chance of passing?
I think it's an excellent plan. It's what Canada has. In fact, they call their national health care system Medicare. And, Lyndon Johnson borrowed that word in the 1960s for his program, which is we call Medicare. And Medicare has worked tremendously well in the United States and with the sickest population. Medicare only applies to people over 65. So, virtually 100% of Medicare recipients within 20 or 30 years of joining the program are dead. And in the process, in between 65 and dead, regardless of the age of dead, that's where the majority of your lifetime health expenses occur. So Medicare has functioned really, really well with the most expensive population in America. So if we were to expand it to everybody, which is nowhere near as expensive as people over 65, it would be just an extraordinary thing for both Medicare and for all the rest of us. Thanks for the call, Henry. You've heard me talking about...
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's pick up some phone calls here. Michael in Brookline, Massachusetts. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
I have two things. One real quick. What have Republicans done for us in our lifetime? The interstate highway system and the Environmental Protection Agency done by Nixon.
But the problem is that both of those were passed by Democratic Congresses. Neither of them was passed by...
Here's the serious thing, which is the election meddling.
Sure.
I have no doubt that the Republicans, not the Republicans, the Russians meddle to a degree, but the United States has been meddling in elections and overthrowing governments, often democratic, in our entire lifetime. And there's not a word about that. And if voter suppression was reversed, which dwarfs according to William Barber, which dwarfs whatever the Russians were able to accomplish, the election would be far different.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And this voter suppression is a big deal. I mean, this is just, it's terrible what these guys are up to.
Yeah, it's terrible, but we do it all around the world without comment.
Well, we do, and I've talked about that in the past, Michael, and it's not a secret even. I mean, right down to the election meddling that we did in Ukraine, for example, and just look up Victoria Nuland. But the problem is when you talk about that in the context of Russians meddling with our election, it sounds like you're justifying the Russians doing that. And there's no justification for Russia involving themselves in our election any more than there is for our involving ourselves in their election. There's, or anybody else's for that matter. And so I tend not to try to draw that parallel because it may sound like I'm trying to rationalize that, and I absolutely am not. If a foreign government, any foreign government, involve themselves in our elections, and we know that Saudi Arabia has, we know Israel has, and presumably, according to the intelligence community, Russia has. We haven't seen the evidence yet. But if any foreign government is involving themselves in our elections, I think that we've got a serious problem, and we should be doing something about it. Michael, thank you for the call. Well said. Tommy in Richmond, Virginia. Hey, Tommy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I want to talk a little bit about Jefferson Beauregard's little dog and show he pulled off today. He sits there and he tells the panel on regards to where they can seize your stuff without you actually going to a trial. And he basically went And I don't know verbatim, but he goes, "Oh, well, I didn't change any laws. That was a law that was there before that I'm just trying to reenact again."
Right.
You know, and, this is a guy that sat up there and lied I don't know how many times already. And it just seems like he can sit up there and BS the whole United States. And the majority of us that have a rational mind sit there and know that he's lying. And they just sit there and keep inviting the guy back and listen to all his crap.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, Al Franken called him out for his lies today, and other senators tried to as well. But on his position on basically stealing your stuff, it's a toxic, wrong, and in my opinion, unconstitutional position. His position on medical marijuana is crazy. And obviously Jefferson Beauregard Sessions' positions on who should be able to vote, on race basically, and the NFL and everything else are troglodytish, for lack of a better word. Tommy, thank you. Well identified, well said. John in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
It's an interesting you mentioned group narcissism. I think it's something Republicans have promoted since the Emancipation Proclamation.
I agree.
Because I think they said to the guys in the South, "Hey, look, your form of slavery is barbaric and unsustainable. This is how we enslave the people up north. And if you try it our way, we can keep you with your wealth. But you're going to tear the country apart with your barbarism." And somebody that they can promote, a narcissist, is easy to control. So I would even submit the reason why the Republicans don't want the Russian information coming out and how they affected our elections is because even the poorly educated are going to be able to draw the parallels to the way the Republicans have been propagandizing them for century now.
Yep.
That's all I had to say.
Okay. Well, you said it very well, John. Thanks a lot for the call. David in Spokane, Washington. Hey, David, what's on your mind today? David?
I went to high school in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and I learned more about the government by watching The West Wing.
Oh, really? I've never watched that
because-
show. I've heard that it's sort of a reinvention of the Clinton presidency.
No, it actually predicted the 2008 election because the 2008 election, the 2006 election on The West Wing basically predicted how the 2008 election would go.
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't want to give any spoilers, but I recommend get Netflix and watch The West Wing from beginning to start, and you will love it.
Okay, I'll have to check it out.
You'll like the Stackhouse filibuster because the senator in that episode reminds me of Bernie Sanders.
Huh. Interesting.
And
I know. That was Aaron Sorkin wrote.
Yeah.
And he was
the first 4 seasons, and he left at the end of the 4th season.
Yeah, he was, but he and the subsequent writers paying careful attention to what's going on in Washington D.C. It's just I haven't watched Game of Thrones yet either. It's which apparently, if you work on a Russian troll farm, you're supposed to watch. But step by step, I'll get there. David, thank you for the call. I guess I'm a cultural illiterate in some regard. We'll be back with more of your calls, my thoughts, and more of the news of the day right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. And welcome back to our Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. This is from the afterword, the very last chapter. It's titled Kali Yuga, which in Hinduism is when the earth goes into a phase of destruction. In the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, President Obama, looking shaken, appeared in the White House Rose Garden to deliver public remarks intended to project a sense of calm. A sense, really, that the basic stability of our country remained intact. Sun is up, Obama said. I know everybody had a long night. I did as well. Had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. End of quote. The next day, when the two men appeared together in the Oval Office, it felt as if the world had slipped through the looking glass.
Trump quickly named Bannon his chief White House strategist. Republicans controlled every branch of government. With Trump's ability to defy every political norm, anything seemed possible. Who could argue otherwise after what had just transpired? And yet, within days of his inauguration, Trump's White House was plunged into chaos and scandal from which it has not recovered and may never. Bannon, the imaginative reconceiver of U.S. politics, hung streams of paper listing Trump's promises from the walls of his West Wing office. His strategy, as always, was to launch furious attacks, this time to, quote, shock the system, end quote, and rapidly reorient the federal government in a more nationalist direction. He called this, with what I took to be intentional irony, a shock and awe approach to asserting Trump's power. But Trump's flurry of activity quickly ran into problems. There was his executive order, sprung a week after his inauguration, banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, which set off nationwide protests and was blocked by the courts. His firing 2 weeks later of National Security Director Michael Flynn for contacts with the Russians. The collapse of his first major legislative initiative, a bill to repeal Obamacare. His firing of FBI Director James Comey. And the swift descent of the West Wing into a viper's nest of backstabbing and leaks. This quick turn toward a crack-up was hardly unforeseeable or even altogether surprising, but it contrasted sharply with the success of a candidate who had dominated his opponents, shaped news coverage, and shown himself to be all but impervious to the forces that overwhelm other politicians. Bannon, whose wild gambits in the campaign had invariably paid off, seemed to run out of magic tricks when Hillary Clinton was no longer a target. The government wasn't as malleable to Trump and Bannon's aggressions as the Republican Party and the cable news channels had been, and they found themselves consistently thwarted and undermined by the courts, by right-wing hardliners in Congress, by their own inexperience and Trump's errant tweets, and by the bureaucracy they were now overseeing. The crises these failures precipitated in the White House cost Bannon much of his influence and soon threatened Trump's presidency. While it's still early in his term, the possibilities that Trump's most ardent supporters once imagined for his presidency already seem to be mostly foreclosed. I think there are 3 main reasons why Trump's administration has so quickly fallen into disorder and confusion. Number 1, Trump thought being president was about asserting dominance. Just after he'd locked up the GOP nominations, Trump said something to me that crystallized his view of politics and explains, to my mind, much of his subsequent difficulties. Quote, I deal with people that are very extraordinarily talented people, he told me. I deal with Steve Wynn. I deal with Carl Icahn. I deal with killers that blow these politicians away. It's not even the same category. This, he meant politics. This is a category that's like 19 levels lower. You understand what I'm saying? Brilliant killers. Trump was equating politics with business and the presidency with the job of being a big shot CEO, a killer. He filled the upper ranks of his administration with people of a similar mindset. Gary Cohn, Wilbur Ross, Steve Bannon, aggressive, domineering men accustomed to getting their way by dint of their position. None had government experience, nor did many others in the West Wing. So none anticipated the problems this approach to governing would cause. Trump's self-conception as the all-powerful apprentice boss blinded him to a fundamental truth of the modern presidency, that the president needs Congress more than the Congress needs the president. Trump's domineering instinct served him poorly, since most members of Congress are secure in their jobs and accountable mainly to their own constituents. And it backfired disastrously when Trump fired Comey after he refused to submit to a pledge of loyalty to his boss. Number 2, Trump ran against the Republican Party, Wall Street, and Paul Ryan, but then took up their agenda. Populists often struggle to govern, but Trump scarcely attempted to lead the populist revolution that he promised. In May, he told me he would transform the Republican Party into a workers' party. But while he kept voicing populist shibboleths, the legislative agenda he took up was the standard conservative fare pushed by Paul Ryan. During the GOP primary, Trump has shrewdly sensed its weak point, Ryan's desire to finance tax cuts for the rich by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicaid, harmed the party's white blue-collar base. Trump told me he'd made this point to Ryan directly. He said, quote, there's no way a Republican is going to beat a Democrat when the Republican is saying we're going to cut your Social Security, and the Democrat is saying we're going to keep it and give you more. The book is Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green. Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and Storm for president. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. What an extraordinary time we live in. You know, we've got a president who lies to the people, which is nothing new. Well, actually, I think this is new, the way that he does it and how, the frequency with which he does it. We've had presidents lie to us probably through much of the history of this country, but this is, he doesn't just lie to us in order to accomplish his political goals. He lies to us about things that he doesn't have to lie to us about. You know, whether he's consoled the mother of a slain soldier, for example. It's extraordinary. And I think that it is this whole identity politics thing on the right of basically, you know, the white identity is the superior identity in America. We used to call this white privilege, right? Or white supremacy. This has become the core of right-wing identity politics. There's not any other way to say that. Danny in Pennsylvania. Hey, Danny, what's on your mind?
Hey, I just wanted to call in and sort of talk about centrist delusions and left political realism. I guess the place to start would be to just say one of my biggest problems with the Obama-era policies was that they were always crafted around this idea that the centrist Democrats had, that no matter which way the Congress will go, Republican, Democrat, but at the end of the day, it'll always be a Democrat in the office. And so when it comes to things like DACA and the Affordable Care Act, they're all sort of required, like a Democratic president, to keep these things around. And now that that's gone, it seems like every day we have to fight to protect the Affordable Care Act or fight to protect welfare. And so,
but that's the nature of democracy, Danny. If you have the majority of people saying we want something different, then you get something different.
Right. But what I'm going to say is that, you know, we have to say to these people, centrists specifically, that, like, not only is single-payer health care the correct option, it is the best system that we have. We also should make the case that from a political realist standpoint, if we want to have genuinely affordable health care for as many people as possible, if not just everybody, we have to have a no-nonsense, just health care for everybody, and go into politics with that sort of attitude if we want to have, you know, victories for the left and build a genuinely social democratic or
I agree. Medicare for all.
Democratic socialist.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you know, it's something that we need to be taking on as much as we can, as quickly as we can. Well said, Danny. Thank you. Dick in Post Falls, Idaho. Hey, Dick, what's on your mind today?
Hey there. So, Tom.
Dick just vanished. Dick, give us a shout back. You just opened up a line. Travis in Fairfax, Virginia. Hey, Travis, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how's it going, boss? Hey, I just wanted to make a comment about Weinstein, and I guess it kind of ties to the white privilege, but I always hear this sort of excusable behavior, more of the Republican characters than the Democrat characters, but it's sort of like they're 50s guys. They're 50s guys. They're from the 50s. This behavior is kind of expected. And it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy in their minds, right? It's okay to do this because the culture says it's okay for them to grope women. Yeah. When in reality, in a large scale, looking at human history in a large scale is bullshit. I'm not saying...
you know, Travis, I'm sorry. We can't use language like that on the air here. Oh, sorry. And so I've got to drop your call. And, you know, I'm assuming we hit the dump button. Okay, great. So thank you. And my apologies if his obscenity got through to anybody. I don't think it did, but... Pete in Atlanta. Hey, Pete, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind?
Yes, how are you today?
Good. What's up?
Hey, Tom, you know, you said something that was very interesting. You articulated it well. I hadn't heard it quite put that way, but presidents have, in fact, not always told the truth. In fact, there's been cases where politicians are expected to lie, but certainly there's a way you do it. But the thing that is different about this president is that he blatantly, not only does he blatantly lie, but he flat out refuses to show his taxes, and yet he has the audacity to talk tax reform. And I find that just unbelievably hypocritical, and nobody's calling him out on it, and I have an issue with that. This guy's taxes, in my mind, will show him to be a criminal. He's a criminal.
Well, my guess is that his taxes will show him to be nowhere near as rich as he says he is.
Well, that's true.
But
I mean, we already know that because, it's been stated that he was always concerned about his public wealth, and rich people don't care about public wealth. They just care about wealth.
Yep. I think.
How can he get away with that? There's no way that we can. Who do we press to get him to show his taxes? Because we'll end a lot of this talk about whether or not he's involved with the Russians and whether he's an honest man. We'll know for sure. The guy's a crook, and he shouldn't be running our country.
Well, with regard to the taxes, there is no requirement that a candidate or a office holder reveal their taxes at the level of president. You have to do that in certain ways when you're running for other offices, but at the level of president, it's a tradition, not a requirement. And so, if you want to force Trump to show his taxes, it's going to require legislation. Several Democrats, both in the House and the Senate, have offered legislation requiring presidential disclosure of assets and taxes, essentially. But Paul Ryan would not allow any of them to come to a vote in the House of Representatives. Mitch McConnell would not allow any of them to come out of committee in the Senate. So it's not going to happen as long as you've got a Republican in the White House. But it wouldn't surprise me if after Trump leaves and we get a good Democrat in the White House and Democrats resume control of the House and Senate, that we start seeing legislation to that effect. And it also wouldn't surprise me if some of what Prosecutor Mueller is doing, looking into Trump's finances, ends up also demonstrating to or having released to us, to the public, his taxes. Because I know that Mueller, or I believe from the reporting I've seen in the press, that Mueller is actually talking to the IRS and actually has Trump's taxes right now. So, if he was using his businesses to do money laundering, which it appears might be one of the things that he would be accused of, then, we'll find out about it. Pete, thanks for the call. I get what you're saying, and I think it's well said. Patricia in Portage, Wisconsin. Hey, Patricia, what's on your mind?
Hey, I've called before. I'm a living wildlife journalist in Madison, and I just wanted to give you a heads up. I think you're probably familiar with Thomas Lindsay and the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund.
And there's a new movie about them.
Communities fight fracking and factory farms and putting rights of nature into small communities and working worldwide. They are holding a symposium this weekend on Friday, the 27th, at Tulane University, the first Rights of Nature symposium live streamed for the public, free to attend in New Orleans. And, I just wrote a column about it, and he claims that our Constitution is one of the most anti-democratic governing documents on the planet, and because it is based on property and commerce over people, over labor, over nature is not mentioned, that the whole thing needs to be scrapped and we need to start again and invent something new, which I agree with. And so I just wanted to give your audience a heads up that they can go to the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, CELDF, online and find that symposium, and it's all day on Friday, and listen to why the rights of nature are so important to be put into law.
Yeah, I agree. And celdef.org is the website. Thomas Lindsay is a genius. He's built this thing by and large himself over the years. And there's also a new movie out called Democracy 2.0, as I recall, that Lila Connors, who worked with me on Leonardo DiCaprio's movie, The 11th Hour, on that 4-part video series that we did that you can find at greenworldrising.org that Leo produced and I wrote and I'm in. And I have nothing to do with this movie other than cheerleading it for it. But Lila did a brilliant job, and Thomas Lindsay is prominent in it. And you can, I believe, I'm going to have to check the website for that, where you can find it and how you can get it. But anyhow, that's also a marvelous thing. Thanks for the heads up on that, Patricia. I appreciate it. Al in Milwaukee. Hey, Al, what's up?
Good afternoon. You made a statement earlier today indicating that we're all family.
Yes.
I am an American. I served in the United States Air Force, and honorably, by the way, and Vietnam veteran. Why is it that African people of African descent who are Americans have to have a voting rights law reenacted every 10 years? If we're all family, why aren't we on the same footing?
Well, as I was pointing out, the right-wing identity politics is to say we're not all family. There's a group that's the in-group, and they're the superior group, and there's a group that's the out-group, and they're the inferior group, and they're identifying that along the lines of race. The metaphor that's used among Democrats and generally on the left in terms of identity politics is we're bringing people in to this larger national identity. We're, our nation started out as our previous caller was talking about, Thomas Lindsay talking about, starting out as basically just a nation for wealthy white men. And over the years, we have included more and more and more people into that family. The Republicans, with their identity politics, are trying to exclude people from our family. And, that all the more the tragedy.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after. And welcome back. Jen in El Paso, Texas, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Jen, what's up?
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm well. What's on your mind today?
Great. Well, first of all, that documentary that you were just talking about, I believe it's called We the People 2.0.
You're right. It is. We the People 2.0. Thank you so much for that, Jen.
You're very welcome. And what I wanted to talk about here is about the defense budget, because it's the one component that is forever increasing, while all the social funds, whatever, are just being decimated through any kind of collective budget that we have. But something that really caught my eye it's been a little while since I've done any research on this, but outside of the continental U.S., besides the military bases that are within the continental U.S., there are 800 U.S. military bases that have a presence throughout the world. And that seems like, I would have thought 100's a lot.
Yeah.
That just seems like a lot. So,
yeah, given that there's only about 193 countries in the world, I think, is the number.
Yeah. Well, and and of course there's more than, one in a couple of the countries like Japan.
And Germany.
But, and of course we have one in Cuba, which is odd, but we do have that one too. But anyway, I find that, I think that pulls together quite a bit for me as far as how out of control this is. Now, without knowing everything, it just seems like a huge number. But I just remember at the end of 2000, that research was done by David Vine in his book, Space Nation. He's done some pieces. Other people have done pieces on this particular subject. But at the end of 2015, and I'm going to let you comment on this, there was a poll conducted by Public Policy Polling. And it asked a question, do you support bombing Agrabah? And I may be mispronouncing the name of the country. But the Republicans were 30% for that idea. That's basically a third. About 13% was against that. Republicans, I'm speaking. The Democrats, as it was put forth, they mentioned only, and I think it's still a high number, 18% were for it. and we're at 38%, maybe closer to 40%. I'm going off the top of my head here. Were against the idea of bombing Agrabah. Now, Agrabah is an Arab kingdom that is referred to in Aladdin. It is a completely make-believe country.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. So, I mean, just little pieces of information.
So what
like
percentage of Republicans were in favor of bombing a non-existent country?
Well, they didn't know it was non-existent. It just sounded probably Muslim enough. 30%, I believe, was the number.
Wow.
It was close to a third.
Because 49% of Americans are in favor of attacking North Korea. Of Republicans are in favor of attacking North Korea.
I know.
Similarly,
it's astounding, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is bizarre. Jen, thanks for the information and the statistic. It's a great one, and you're right. The defense budget is going up while everything else is going down. Jen, thanks so much for the call. We'll be right back. It is coming up on 10 minutes. Amazing. 30% of it. And that's just astonishing. That's absolutely astonishing. 30% of Republicans want to bomb a country that doesn't exist. It's like, how much more bizarre does it get? Steve in Van Buren, Michigan. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
It's Van Buren, Missouri.
Actually, Missouri. Okay. Sorry about that, Steve.
No problem. I'd like to see if you can clarify something for me. The Affordable Care Act required young, healthy people as well as the sicker, and yet I'm on Medicare, and you mentioned earlier today that you wish that Medicare covered 100%, but that they carved out a 20% gap so they could sell to insurance companies.
Right.
And I'm wondering, how do these insurance companies make any money on insuring basically people 65 and older?
With massive subsidies. When an insurance company writes a policy, whether it's a Medigap policy that simply fills in that 20%, or a Medicare Advantage policy where it literally pulls you out of the Medicare program and puts you in what appears to be identical to Medicare, but it's really entirely a for-profit health insurance company. In both cases, the health insurance company goes to the federal government, and invisible to you and invisible to me, the federal government subsidizes those insurance companies in a very, very healthy fashion. It's one of the reasons why United Healthcare was able to compensate their chief executive officer to the tune of over $1 billion, and why AARP, which makes most of their money through, or at least used to make most of their money, I'm assuming it's still the case, most of their money by selling United Healthcare Medicap and Medicare Advantage plans. You walk into their headquarters and it's like, whoa, I've stepped into the Wizard of Oz. I mean, it's opulent, it's just beautiful. And the reason why is because there's enormous money being made in Medicare, and it's being made through subsidies from the federal government. And I just think that's crazy. I think the federal government, instead of subsidizing for-profit insurance companies, even though it's only 20% of Medicare, should be simply paying all the expenses and let those profits that are going to AARP and United Healthcare and the other health insurance companies right now instead pay for actual health care for a larger number of people. Steve, thanks for the call. Eugene in Laurel, Delaware. Hey, Eugene, what's on your mind today? Eugene? Okay, no Eugene. Dick in, I don't have a city for you, Dick. What's up?
I'm in Post Falls, Idaho, but thanks.
Great.
Hey, about 30 years ago, I thought I was a Republican. And the reason all I did was listen to AM radio all day long. And that's all I heard was, the regular right-wing guys.
Yep.
Until we figure out how to get more construction guys listening to something different. The other day I was walking around a new subdivision that we just moved into. The guy on a excavator had Rush Limbaugh blaring out of his excavator where you could hear it a block away, and there was a whole crew of guys with shovels just sitting on their shovel handles listening to Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, holy cow.
Yep.
So, you know, we need to change. We need more of these guys that used to be Democrats voting Democrat again. And until we get you on more AM radio stations, I don't think it's going to change, Tom.
Well, it's not just me, Dick. This is a larger systematic thing. When Lewis Powell in 1971 wrote his memo to Eugene Sindor at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, he basically said, you know, we've got to take over the infrastructure of the United States. We've got to take over the channels of information. And what has happened is through agglomeration, through mergers and acquisitions, in large part, you've got some very, very partisan corporations now controlling most of the radio stations in this country and many of the television stations. And if Sinclair gets the merger that they want, they'll be in 72% of American households. They're just doing what Lewis Powell suggested, and it's worked. You're absolutely right. It is an enormously successful and enormously effective propaganda machine. And people, you know, that guy driving the backhoe is listening to Rush Limbaugh, who's making millions of dollars a year, and thinking that Rush Limbaugh is telling him, you know, the perspective of the average working person. And he's not. Limbaugh is reflecting the perspective of the billionaire class and how the billionaire class wants construction workers to think. And it's really sad that they get sucked into this stuff. It really, really is. Dick, thanks a lot for the call. Craig in Hayward, California. Hey, Craig, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. On the topic of the national narcissism, I wanted to mention a book that was written by Michael Parenti called Super Patriotism back in 2004.
Okay.
And it addresses that topic directly, and it points out the difference between what real patriotism is and what he calls super patriotism, which are these people who are after nothing but sort of ego-feeding, we're the best, chanting, waving the flag, and I think it's a good book to give to right-wingers who do that kind of thing to kind of help them gain some insight into what they're doing. And you know, and he also makes the point that the people who are pushing that form of patriotism are typically ones who are really hurting the country by, you know, for their own profits as well.
Yeah. Henry Wallace talks about this in a 1946 editorial. I think it was 44. Yeah, it was. It was 1944 editorial in either March or June of 1944 in the New York Times, in which he talked about these conservatives. He said they claim to be super patriots, but they're actually spokesmen for vested interest and monopoly. And, you know, they claim to love the Constitution, but, you know, they're in practice tearing it down. It's a really, really brilliant piece. If you Google Henry Wallace in quotes and my name in quotes, you'll find several articles I've written about it. But again, this is nothing new, but thanks for the tip on Michael Parenti's book. He's a great guy. And yeah, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Well, in this case, meet the new propaganda, same as the old propaganda. Craig, thanks a lot for the call. Thank you to all of you who have been calling, listening, participating, and most importantly, participating in our democracy. Thanks so much. And we will be back tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag your hero.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets. and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.